Have you ever wondered if there are books of the Bible that were once read by the faithful but then disappeared almost as though the world was not ready for them? Imagine a book so mysterious, so full of hidden visions, that it was whispered among the earliest believers, treasured in ancient times, and then it vanished. For centuries, its words slept beneath the stars, lost to most of humanity, until it was found again like a buried treasure. This is the story of that forgotten book, the Book of Enoch. It is not part of the Bible most of us know today, yet its shadow stretches across history. It speaks of angels who left their places in heaven, of giants who walked the earth, and of a man who was taken by God without ever tasting death. Tonight, as you listen, let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you into that world where mysteries rest between heaven and earth, and secrets once hidden rise again like the dawn. Enoch himself is no stranger to the scriptures. In the book of Genesis, we find a single line about him: Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more, for God took him. Such a simple phrase, yet it carries the weight of eternity. Unlike others, he did not meet death. He was lifted, carried away into the unknown. That silence left by the Bible opened a door, and through that door, the book of Enoch steps forward, filling the quiet with visions of the heavens, encounters with angels, and glimpses of the end of days. But here lies the puzzle. If this book is so old, so rich in mystery, why is it not in the Bible you hold today? Why did it vanish for centuries, almost as though hidden from the eyes of the world? Some say it was too strange, too filled with mysteries that people were not ready to face. Others suggest it was deliberately set aside, considered too dangerous to preserve. Yet whatever the reason, its disappearance has only deepened its mystery. And what was forgotten feels more precious. What was silenced speaks even louder when it is finally heard again. Long ago, ancient Jewish traditions preserved fragments of Enoch's writings. Early Christians, too, cherished it. Some even quoted it as though it carried divine weight. For a time, it stood near the heart of faith. But as centuries rolled on and leaders decided which books would form the sacred canon, Enoch's words slowly faded. By the Middle Ages, they had almost vanished completely, surviving only in Ethiopia, where the book was carefully guarded in the old language of Ge'ez. Think of it. For over 1,000 years, the words of Enoch were hidden from most of the world, tucked away in mountains and monasteries. Then, like a lamp uncovered, it reappeared in the 18th century. Once again, people read of the Watchers, the angels who descended to earth, of the Nephilim, the mighty giants born from them, and of visions of heaven's courts and the great judgment still to come. What was buried now spoke again, as though time itself could not silence it. Perhaps the most haunting part of this mystery is imagining why it was removed. Was it fear of its warnings? Was it the strangeness of its tales? Angels teaching forbidden knowledge, giants filling the land, and a world awaiting judgment? Or was it simply the course of history, shaped by men who believed they were guarding truth by silencing it? Whatever the case, the Book of Enoch survived, waiting like a star behind clouds, hidden but not gone. And through it all, one man stands at the center. Enoch, the man who walked so closely with God that he was taken away. His story is more than a record of visions. It is a reminder that heaven and earth are not as far apart as we think. That sometimes, a single life can open a doorway to mysteries that outlast kingdoms and empires. So as you listen beneath the quiet sky tonight, let the story of Enoch draw you gently into its depths. Let its forgotten words drift through you like a dream, like a soft tide carrying you into hidden waters where ancient voices whisper again. The book that once vanished has returned, and its secrets are ready to be heard. Friends, if you are enjoying this story, please help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Share this video with your friends and loved ones, and tell us in the comments. From which city and at what time are you watching this video? Write your name and city below, and may Jesus bless you for it. When the world was young, the nights were longer, and the earth seemed unspoiled, as if it were awaiting an invisible presence. Living in accordance with the cycles of the sun and moon, humanity had started to disperse throughout the plains and valleys, constructing homes out of wood and stone. The heavens were vast, a silent dome of mysteries, and the stars above were their lamps. At one point in that peaceful era, the silence of heaven broke, and the opening scenes of a grand tale started to take shape. They arrived from beyond the boundless veil of the sky. It was so quiet that even the trees seemed to pause, not with thunder or a roar that rocked the mountains. They were referred to as the Watchers, heavenly angels sent to watch over the earth's children and to observe men and women's lives. They were there to observe, to watch, and maybe to lead when the time was appropriate, not to dominate or rule. Imagine their eyes glowing with eternity and their hearts retaining the memory of the light from heaven as they first set foot on earth. The air itself must have had a distinct feel, as if it were infused with a sacred and strange energy. Standing atop mountains, they looked down at the world. Fires flickered in the night, villages were strewn all over the place, and people continued living their ordinary lives without realizing that heavenly eyes were now observing from above. According to the Book of Enoch, they arrived in groups and descended together, sworn allegiance to ensure that no one would act alone. Because the heavens are well organized, even their descent carries the burden of responsibility. Even though their goal was obvious, the very things they were supposed to be observing would soon put their hearts to the test. Seeing people from a distance is one thing, but getting up close and personal with those who live their lives is quite another. The Watchers saw beauty in God's creation as they observed humanity. They witnessed the tender ties between families, the innocence of children, and the laughter around fires. They also witnessed labor and hardship, the hunching of backs under the weight of harvest, and the fatigue in eyes after a long day. And something stirred in their eyes. Maybe a desire to get closer, to be more than aloof observers. It was the start of a shadow that would deepen as their gaze lingered. According to some traditions, Shemhaza was their leader. His voice carried weight, and he was a powerful presence among them. He was the one who stood with the others and talked about what their eyes had started to sense. He spoke words that would alter everything after witnessing the grace and beauty of men's daughters on earth. A desire to join those they observed in their lives, and to descend with them both spiritually and physically. However, they were still angels dressed in the purpose of heaven at this initial moment, before the shadow grew deeper. They gazed at the mountains that raised their crowns to the heavens, the rivers that twisted like silver snakes, and the vast lands. As if it were a gem set in the darkness, they were in awe of the earth. And despite their apparent frailty, the people below were alive with a spark that bore a hint of the divine image. Observing them was like witnessing God's creation come to life beneath the stars. The Watchers stood silently night after night, their shapes silhouetted against the moon. They might have seemed like dim figures on the ridges to the few who looked up from the ground, tall and motionless, their eyes blazing with an odd fire. Tales of glowing creatures that watched over the mountains without causing harm or assistance could have been whispered among the populace. Elders shook their heads uneasily, unsure of what it meant to be observed by people who were not of this world, while children might have pointed in awe. Their presence seemed to be reacted to by the earth itself. The nights seemed fuller, as if layered with unseen eyes. Rivers glistened with an additional sheen, and winds whispered across the valleys, never really understanding that the heavens themselves had stooped to gaze upon them. Humanity went about its daily lives. Between the immortal and the mortal, between the invisible and the visible, a bridge was built during this silent descent. But there was a seed in that silence. Their fascination increased with the amount of time they spent watching. Feeling is drawing, and seeing is feeling. Duty gradually gave way to desire. They had the ability to wonder, to admire, and even to hunger for things that were not rightfully theirs. Their hearts were not made of stone. There is more to the Watcher's story than just angels landing on Earth. It is about what happens when those who are supposed to protect are ensnared by what they observe, and about the thin line that separates obedience from temptation. The first silent fissures of disobedience formed in their eyes as they stared too long. They remain watchers, however, for the time being in this section of the story, standing far above the valleys, gazing down with eyes that have witnessed the splendor of heaven and now rest on the frail beauty of earth. Their purpose is still unknown. The fire wings are folded and their voices are low. Beneath them, humanity sleeps, oblivious to the fact that their story is no longer theirs alone, because the distinction between the divine and the mortal becomes hazy when heaven keeps an excessive amount of watch. The watchers stay silent on the heights as the night grows darker and human fires burn low. These angels stand as shadows of eternity between the earth, which breathes softly below, and the stars, which stretch endlessly above them. The first rumblings of a tale that will determine the world's destiny have come to life. Their descent is complete, and their gaze has begun. A sound that was not of earth was carried by the winds high upon the ridges of Mount Hermon. The mountain rose like the crown of a giant, its slopes covered in forests that murmured in the night, and its peaks covered in snow. Its heights offered sweeping views of valleys, rivers that shimmered like silver threads, and the strewn fires of distant villages. But the mountain was not quiet this evening, because a meeting unlike any the world had ever witnessed was happening here, under the stars. In the silence, 200 figures came down, angels who were fed up with keeping watch. Semjaza, their leader, stood in the middle of them, his eyes heavy with the knowledge of what he was going to suggest. Although he spoke steadily, there was a hint of fear in his voice, as if he were aware that he was stepping over a line that would never be crossed again. The others, powerful creatures who had previously only known obedience, waited around him, shivering under the force of desire. As Semjaza spoke, the air itself appeared to hold its breath. He reminded them of the beauty of men's daughters, of what their eyes had witnessed, and of the desire that had grown inside each of them. He talked about the mysteries of the stars, the ways of metal and stone, the medicines concealed in roots and leaves, secrets locked in heaven, and knowledge kept from the earth. He claimed that all of these could be shared with humanity. All of these have the power to elevate men and women above the level of simplicity in their lives and endow them with angelic wisdom. However, there was danger in his words in addition to promise, because flesh was not intended for such knowledge. Rebellion would tarnish their place in heaven forever if they took something that was not theirs to give. Semjaza hesitated for a moment, his heart divided between desire and fear, knowing this. Then he said, "I fear you will not all agree to do this deed, and I alone will bear the penalty of a great sin," which reverberated across the stones of Hermon. The weight of truth in his words caused the others to stir. Everyone wanted what they wanted, but nobody wanted to face heaven's judgment by themselves. Then there was a surge of agreement among them, a chorus that started as murmurs. They refused to leave their leader alone. They would fall together if they fell. They would rebel together if they did. They then took an oath to bind themselves. They swore with raised hands and blazing eyes beneath the towering cliffs and in the icy moonlight. As the words of their vow poured into the night, the mountain itself appeared to tremble. Never to turn back, never to give up on what they had decided, and never to allow fear to separate them. The earth itself attested to their promise as they sealed their oath on Mount Hermon's very ground. The mountain took on a new meaning for them after that, Sin. Se Hermon means the place of the oath. Its stones stood as a silent testament to their commitment and the solidarity of angels who changed from being observers to plotters. The stars above appeared to dim as the oath was recited, as if the heavens themselves were turning their heads away. A strange fire was kindling inside each of the 200. Their words and the desire that brought them here bound them together. They harbored a sense of defiance against the order they had previously served, as well as a sense of liberation from following their own path. When they looked at each other, they saw resolve instead of hesitation. Something fierce shone in Semjaza's eyes, as if the fear had subsided now that he was not the only one making the decision. However, what precisely had they pledged to do? They took an unambiguous oath. They would enter both men's and women's lives. They would share what had been concealed in heaven with the wives they would take from among the daughters of men. Powerful secrets, earth-shaping knowledge, and abilities that could transform mortals into something more than they are. These were treasures taken from the heavens' vaults, not gifts given in good faith. Their voices trailed off as the night grew darker. After the oath was taken, there was once more silence. But this time it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of a storm building, of a weight that no man could yet feel bearing down on the planet. Humanity continued to sleep in the valleys, oblivious to the decisions made above them. Children continued to dream in their beds, the villagers below continued to laugh around fires, and nobody realized that 200 angels had committed themselves to permanently changing the path of their world. For a moment, Semjaza stood apart and looked up at the stars. This meant something to him. They would never again be welcomed into the harmony of heaven. They had traded the transient touch of mortal life for their eternal spot. He did not falter, however, as he returned his attention to his brother's company. They couldn't go back because their oath had sealed their doom. The Watchers then continued their descent, leaving Hermon's heights in their wake. With the fire of forbidden purpose burning within each of them, they dispersed throughout the lands inhabited by men and women. After they were gone, the air felt heavier, as if the world's equilibrium had changed. Even though there was no lightning or thunder, the earth had changed. According to some, the stones where they took their oath still whispered betrayal when the wind passed over them, and the ground where they took it is still cursed. Some claimed that, haunted by the memory of that night, Hermon turned into a place where the line separating heaven and earth thinned. The mountain could never forget whether it was cursed or sacred, because the oath was emblazoned on its very name. Consequently, 200 angels entered men's lives while being bound by a vow. Soon, their shadows would envelop the planet, not as silent observers, but as secret keepers and emissaries of wisdom that mortals were never intended to possess. Even though no one below had yet to awaken to the sound of approaching footsteps, the night of their oath turned into the dawn of humanity's corruption. While the oath beneath Mount Hermon burned hot and alive, the stars above wheeled eternally cold. The Watchers had made their decision, and with that decision, a narrative was initiated that would reverberate for generations to come, influencing judgments, legends, and the world's ultimate destiny. The night was quiet and deep, but beneath its placid exterior, hearts that had once been filled with duty were now stirred with desire. With their memories of their oath under Mount Hermon still vivid, the Watchers had descended, their gazes focused on the lives below. As they strolled through the valleys and forests, they witnessed people in their most basic states, laughing and singing, working and sleeping. And it was in that silent observation that desire began to blossom. They had come to observe, to see, but there was a beauty in the human world that no angel had foreseen, a gentle and radiant charm that inspired more than awe. The Watchers were particularly interested in the women. They moved with a grace and warmth that seemed to reflect something eternal, something that even angels yearned to touch. Whether they were walking alongside rivers, gathering herbs, or weaving homespun cloths in the soft light of morning fires. As beings of light and order, The Watchers were dragged into emotions they had never experienced before, a desire that tugged at their hearts more powerfully than their own wings could carry. Theirs had been a duty-driven gaze, but it had developed into something else entirely: awe, fascination, and a desire for intimacy that heaven had not intended. Their leader, Shemahaza, was the first to notice the change. His heart, which had vowed to observe only, now ached to get closer, to go beyond the sphere of observation. With a gentle yet forceful tone, he called out to the others, expressing not disobedience but the universally acknowledged fact that mortals were more beautiful than their outward appearance, more than their transient beauty, and more than the very essence of life. Even those who had experienced eternity were moved by something in it. The Watchers nodded one after the other, their wings gently folding as a resolve, not yet bold but subtly inevitable, began to take shape. Thus, the initial action was performed. They moved carefully among the people, taking care to avoid frightening them and to hide from the untrained eye. However, the human women felt the otherworldly presence even in this delicate approach. Everyone experienced a brief thrill and chill, a clue that something much bigger than the everyday world had touched them, even though some believed it to be a dream and others a shadow moving with the wind. These inconspicuous interactions created a sense of tension and desire that pervaded the land like a fog. Once defined by their position in heaven, the Watchers now found themselves on the other side of a line they had vowed never to cross. They exchanged confessions and fears in whispers, but the pull was too strong to resist. The desire to become a part of the human world, to move from spectator to participant, to integrate into the fabric of earthly existence, had transcended mere fascination. They saw the opportunity to create something new, something that was neither entirely human nor entirely angelic, in their union with mortals, a legacy that would preserve their essence for generations to come. The first union then took place. The Watchers, their otherworldly forms shimmering softly in the darkness, approached the women with reverence and awe in a secret valley where moonlight fell on the earth like silver. Curiosity was tempered by fear, and curiosity was tempered by the warmth emanating from these mortal creatures. The walls between worlds became less distinct. Heaven's borders loosened, and the divine made contact with humanity for the first time, not as a ruler or an observer, but as a partner. The Nephilim, enormously powerful creatures that possessed both the essence of angels and the delicate beauty of human life, were born out of this union. The change appeared to be recognized by the valley itself. Rivers reflow, ected the moon in a deeper silver. Trees bowed gently in the wind, and there was a quiet magic in the night air. These early unions were private, respectful, and endowed with a force that would reverberate throughout the nation. They were neither boisterous nor violent. The cost of straying from duty into desire was now clear to the Watchers who had come to observe. Unaware of the wider ramifications, the human women only had a brief and enigmatic encounter that affected both their lives and future generations. At first, word of these unions spread quietly. The villagers described men and women of unusual size, children who grew faster and stronger than their peers, and eyes that seemed to contain an unnatural light. Some whispered that the mountains themselves recalled the night when angels walked among people as lovers and companions rather than as messengers, that the wind carried secrets, and that some valleys glistened with an unearthly energy. Like echoes of a dream half remembered, the whispers moved slowly, whispering in low tones from one generation to the next. But the consequences did not escape the Watchers. The distinction between heaven and earth became increasingly hazy with each mortal union, and a faint uneasiness started to creep in. By exchanging observation for participation and silence for desire, they had brought in a force that would alter the course of history. Despite the seriousness of their decision, they were unable to turn away because the beauty they had seen had captivated an enduring part of them. Even the stars above appeared to stop, retaining their brightness in silent acknowledgement of the events taking place below. The watchers moved among people night after night, being cautious not to show off their full strength and to stay undetectable. They shared, mentored, and taught in secret while harboring the tension of their transgression. Action had evolved from desire, and creation had started to plant the planet with creatures that would forever alter the course of history. And so, through the blending of the divine and the mortal, the tale of forbidden love was inscribed on the world, not with ink or parchment, but with life itself. But beneath all of this, there was a silent reality. Once aroused, desire is difficult to control. The consequences were not just for the watchers, but also for every child of their unions, every valley they touched, and every river and forest under their eyes. They had ventured into a world they did not fully comprehend. The world itself waited, as if it knew that this was just the start of a tale that would reverberate through the ages, while the night seemed to hold its breath and the wind whispered secrets through the trees. A force of both tenderness and danger, a blending of light and shadow, of heaven's purpose and earth's beauty, emerged from the watcher's first gentle touch with humanity. The wind carried the whispers of forbidden love, a tale that was whispered to those who were willing to listen. And the young, unprepared world started to tremble with the first echoes of a history that humans and angels would now share. The land started to creak under the weight of what had been let loose beneath the wide skies and quivering mountains. Once in control of their little fields and peaceful villages, humans now felt helpless in the face of creatures that could devour what had taken generations to create in a matter of hours. Overnight, livestock disappeared, crops vanished, and homes were broken by hands too strong to stop, mothers and fathi. Bears prayed in silence, their hearts heavy with fear and anxiety, while children hid in shaky corners, their little voices drowned beneath the Nephilim's thunderous footsteps. However, this sorrow was not limited to the earth. With every act of injustice and loss, the cries of the oppressed gradually became louder. Their voices pierced hills and forests, reaching high into the night as women whose families had been split apart whispered. Children wept as they looked for what had been taken, naive and oblivious to the forces that molded their world. The weight of human sorrow seemed to be carried by even the rivers, a soft murmur that echoed along valleys. These voices, unadulterated in their suffering, managed to transcend the limits of the planet. The heavens, which had been silent observers for a long time, started to tremble with grief. Even the stars appeared to flicker with a faint awareness of the suffering below, and angels who had not yet descended paused, their focus drawn to the depth of suffering. The earth itself seemed to have turned into a chorus of mourning, with each note pleading for help, fairness, and equilibrium. There were numerous forms of oppression. After laboring diligently to plant their fields, the villagers woke up to bare ground, their harvests gone in a single night. Families that had been rearing cattle for years discovered that their herds had been drained, trampled underfoot, or stolen by massive hands that were unrestrained. Once playing freely in the meadows, children now hid in fear, their laughter turning to trembling breaths and whispers. Unaware of evil, the Nephilim obeyed the commands of their massive bodies, but the human world, small and delicate, felt every blow with sorrow. The voices became louder as a result. They evolved into prayers that were beyond human understanding and expressed both desperation and hope. Fathers whispered for strength, mothers for protection, and children for safety. Their voices blended with one another until the air above the land was heavy with grief and desire. The sounds were carried by hills, absorbed by forests, and reflected back in ripples of silent resonance by rivers. It was an unavoidable chorus, a tune of hopelessness and faith that rose steadily toward the invisible worlds. In the hopes that the weight of their suffering would be heard collectively, some people got together in secret to share their stories and grievances. Under the cover of darkness, They lit little fires while pleading for the protection of whatever forces might still be in charge and offering brief prayers. Every voice, whether a cry or a whisper, added to a delicate yet potent tapestry of grief that united families and villages in a shared cry for help. In their vast and ignorant presence, the Nephilim were unable to fully understand the extent of the suffering they inflicted. Unaware that every action, every meal, and every step left traces of sorrow behind, they saw people running away or hiding and took it for play or curiosity. However, something inside the Watchers was also stirred by the cries that made it to heaven. The once desirous angels were now uneasy, feeling that the balance they had upset had far more repercussions than they had anticipated. The profound injustice taking place in the valleys below was sensed by their half-human hearts. These voices seemed to rise, and the sky itself responded. The nights had a strange, silent weight. As though the world were bending closer to listen, the clouds grew thicker and the winds carried whispers across the plains. According to some, the moonlight softened and the star flickered in recognition, illuminating the landscapes with a soft reflection and creating shadows that seemed to reflect the pain of the human heart. A silent narrative was being woven into the very fabric of creation, with each tiny voice, tear, and trembling breath contributing to a larger pattern. Nevertheless, there were times of silent hope even amid the sadness. Villagers supported one another by sharing what food was left over, protecting children and providing consolation when words could not. Elders whispered tales of faith and protection to lead hearts through the dark. Fathers held their families close under shaky roofs, and mothers sang lullabies to allay fears. These modest deeds of bravery and love joined the chorus, reaching upward with tenacity and humility like threads of light entwined with the shadows of despair. The oppressed people's cries were not ignored. The heavens had become conscious of the imbalance, but the world appeared far away and overwhelming. Beings who had once walked with the Watchers and witnessed the results of forbidden unions were aware that the suffering of the innocent had transcended the limits of mortal existence. The prayers were gentle yet forceful, not commands but pleas, a reminder that even the most frail human voice could have immeasurable weight when it was interwoven with grief, hope, and faith. Thus, the cries of the oppressed grew louder and louder as the giants roamed on, devouring fields, flocks, and the tenuous safety of human life. Each note of these voices, which came from shivering children, silent villages, and hidden cottages, was a subliminal plea for justice and the restoration of the natural order. The land itself appeared to remember, with each hill, forest, and stream, resonating with the grief and hope of a people whose world had been altered by creatures too big, too strong, and too foreign to completely comprehend the significance of their own existence. The Watchers realized that their influence could go beyond the physical realm as the Nephilim expanded and roamed the lands. In addition to their desire, they had brought with them knowledge from the heavens, including creation and power secrets that were never intended for mortal hands. Slowly, silently, across the plains and valleys, under the shadow of old trees, they started to tell humanity these secrets. Even though the gifts were modest at first, a new method for shaping stone and forging tools that could cut more durable and sharply, they started to upset the equilibrium of daily life. The people were in awe of these gifts, their hands shaking with the excitement of newly acquired skill and their eyes widening at the possibilities. The world of men began to change as metalwork grew stronger, more resilient, and sharper. Once crude weapons now had a precision that reflected the wisdom of heaven. Even so, humans were uneasy, feeling that these gifts were both a blessing and a burden, and that the hands that taught them had come from a place far beyond their own. The Watchers then explained how the Earth's minerals, roots, and herbs could both help and hurt. While some humans discovered poisons, charms, and subtle ways to harm, others learned to make medicines, salves, and remedies that relieved pain and cured illness. These were gifts wrapped in temptation, knowledge that could be applied for either good or bad, and the Watchers silently observed each lesson, knowing that fascination could lead to danger and curiosity to obsession. They continued to give more. Under the stars, astrology, the study of the stars, was taught in whispered lessons. Humans developed the ability to measure time, read the heavens, forecast the seasons, and comprehend the motions of the stars. As if the universe itself had opened up to them, it was captivating, almost euphoric. However, even this information was significant. The Watchers were aware that a view of the heavens was a glimpse of eternity, and that such a view could elevate the human heart too high and beyond its proper place, luring mortals to pride and an unwarranted desire for power. Over time, the gifts became more daring. Candlelight whispered the secrets of magic, of rituals that summoned invisible powers. Humans acquired gestures and symbols, chants and rituals, and methods for calling forth or influencing things that ought to have remained hidden. These lessons were alluring, encased in wonder and awe, but they were not without their dark undertones. Curiosity gave rise to fear as knowledge proliferated and power to jealousy. The Watchers watched as the distinction between corruption and guidance became more hazy, knowing that they had let loose forces that would be difficult to control. The Watchers' gifts, weapons and tools, medicine and magic, astrology and incantations, were like rivers that poured into the world, changing everything in their path. They were employed by some to construct, heal, measure the stars, and live in balance with the changing of the seasons. Others used them to establish dominance, inflict harm, gain an advantage over neighbors, and create previously unimaginable routes of devastation. The world started to feel different, brighter with possibilities it could hardly comprehend, and heavier with the weight of knowledge it was not designed to carry. Despite their strength and knowledge, the Watchers did nothing but watch this unfold. They witnessed the effects of their knowledge and life being shared. As they watched people succeed and create, some felt proud of what they could now accomplish. Others watched human greed and fear take root, and they felt regret, a shadow across their hearts. Their own desire and the union of heaven and earth had tainted the gifts they had given, and there was no way to recover what had been given. Once the stars were read, they could not be concealed, the knowledge could not be unspoken, and the tools could not be undone. With the knowledge they had gained, the recipients of these gifts started to build new settlements, villages, strongholds, and even entire civilizations. Stronger houses and walls could be built thanks to metalwork. Life expectancy was extended by medicine. Planting and harvesting were guided by astrology, and magic hinted at ways to subvert reality, even if only slightly. Beneath this advancement, however, was a faint uneasiness that ran through the generations, a realization that such authority came at a price. The once natural harmony started to change, as if the sky and land themselves remembered the hands that had imparted knowledge that was not intended for them. Nevertheless, the Watchers took no action. From guardians to teachers and now to witnesses, their mission had changed. They lingered in hills and forests, watching the changes and marveling at human ingenuity, while also realizing that the balance had been upset. Under Mount Hermon, they had acted as one, and now every act of corruption and human creation echoed that oath. The blending of heaven and earth was demonstrated by every sword forged, spell whispered, and star charted, serving as a reminder that curiosity and desire could change the world in ways neither realm had foreseen. Some of the Nephilim, the Watchers' offspring, also took part and taught people in secret. Their presence made the impossible seem possible, and their size and strength gave the lessons authority. Humans learned more quickly, reached higher, and occasionally stumbled farther when the Nephilim served as middlemen. These were gifts that were both valuable and dangerous, full of promise but also tinged with peril. With creatures that had learned too much too quickly and were unable to fully comprehend or control what had been shared, the fertile and life-ready earth now bore a weight it had never experienced before. Thus, he watchers' gifts quietly dispersed throughout the land under the night sky. The villagers whispered about powerful tools, secret arts, and knowledge that they had seen in the moonlight or in dreams. Even though they were not always aware of the origin of these gifts, they sensed an unearthly presence in each lesson. Silent and unfailing, the mountains, rivers, and forests recalled the time when heaven reached out to earth in ways that would reverberate through the ages, influencing both wonder and fear as well as civilization. Once serene and fertile, the earth started to feel the burden of creatures that were neither entirely divine nor entirely human. As the offspring of heaven and earth, the Nephilim not only grew in size but also in hunger, which was as boundless as the night sky and as vast as their strength. It appeared to be controllable at first, a curiosity about their enormous bodies and expanding appetites. They consumed the food that people provided, such as field crops, orchard fruits, and village livestock. However, their demands grew with every season, and the amount of men available to them appeared to be decreasing. Once awed by their presence, the villagers started to watch with apprehension. With their hands picking grain as if the earth itself had given it up, the Nephilim could clear a field of wheat in a single day. Once plentiful, orchards were bared in a matter of hours. The appetite of these giant kids wiped out the animals that had roamed freely across pastures and valleys. Human-land harmony wavered, and harvest songs became more subdued and tinged with fear. Since hunger is a force that cannot gauge kindness, the giants themselves appeared to be oblivious to cruelty. Instinctive and powerful, they took what they needed, easily consuming with their massive jaws and hands what humans could hardly defend. Trees were snapped to reach the highest fruits, roots were unearthed to reveal hidden bulbs and tubers, and even the forests were not spared. The earth softened, bent, and reshaped itself as if it had also been called to serve, and the world appeared to tremble beneath their appetite. A few Nephilim started to go beyond what the natural world could offer. Swamps were trampled in pursuit of frogs and small animals, and rivers were disrupted to capture fish. The once tranquil sounds of the valleys, the rustling of leaves, the calls of animals, were replaced by low, rumbling echoes of footsteps, and devouring as birds fled in fear at the sight of these enormous children. Even humans, who created these creatures through illegal unions, started to worry about their own survival. In addition to their desire for food, the giants were hungry for power, a means of claiming control over the planet. Humans initially attempted to control it. In an effort to appease the Nephilim and keep themselves safe, they left sacrifices in fields and on hillsides. In an effort to appease the giants' ravenous appetite, the villagers offered sacrifices of crops, left animals tied by rivers, and muttered prayers. It worked for a while. These offerings were accepted by some Nephilim, but they were not so readily satisfied. Every meal only postponed the inevitable return to hunger, and every gift only stoked their desire. Then the hunger became more hazardous. When the Nephilim realized how strong and swift they were, they started stealing not only what people grew, but also what they valued. Children were occasionally taken away, livestock disappeared, and when villages awoke, their food supplies had been exhausted and their houses had been partially demolished by creatures that needed far more than the planet could offer. Fear swept across the country like a shadow. Awe and wonder gave way to trembling and hiding, and the threat of these giant kids who could eat anything in their path seemed to weigh heavily on the air itself. The giants were motivated by a force greater than thought, a natural law in their hybrid bodies that demanded satisfaction, and they did not think cruelly. Their hands, their thoughts, and their steps were all driven by hunger. Fields were drained more quickly than people could plant them, rivers were rerouted in search of fish and water, and forests were cleared not for lumber but for food. The landscape was subtly but permanently altered by their movements. The earth started to show the scars of their unending consumption as hills were leveled beneath footsteps and valleys were widened by rushing feet. The giants' hunger led to conflict even among themselves. The younger or weaker Nephilim would have to scavenge as the stronger Nephilim would take the richest lands, the biggest herds, and the most rivers. Despite being instinctive, this conflict represented the results of unbridled hunger and the inherent conflict between creatures too strong to live in harmony in a world designed for common mortals. A stage dominated by titans transformed the villages into the smallest players, the rivers into highways of pursuit, and the mountains and forests into arenas. Nevertheless, people were unable to refrain from observing. Even in terror, there was awe and despair mixed together in a fascination. The memory of heaven, the echo of angelic beauty, and the wonder of their existence were all carried within the Nephilim despite their devouring nature. To watch them eat was to see the entwining of creation and destruction. Children would whisper stories about beasts that disappeared under hands too strong to stop them, rivers that seemed to empty in a single night, and enormous shadows moving across fields at dusk. Their hunger gave rise to legends, tales that would be passed down from one generation to the next, veiled in both fascination and terror. And the land itself bent beneath them as the Nephilim grew. Plains turned into paths of trampled soil. Rivers changed their paths to avoid the weight of massive footsteps, and forests were reduced to mere remnants of trees. Once gentle and in balance, the world was now marked by creatures that devoured with a power that no regular human could match. The wind carried tales of unfulfilled hunger, the rivers lamented their lost waters, and the mountains whispered of the past. From the shadows, the watchers could observe the results of their unions and gifts as they developed. What had started out as love and curiosity, as well as fascination with people, had evolved into something much more complex. The world was being reshaped by the giants, who were the offspring of heaven and earth. Their ravenous appetite was both a blessing and a curse, a silent reminder that some creations cannot be contained once released. Each field cleared, river changed, and village upended was a testament to the blending of the divine and the mortal. The land started to creak under the weight of what had been let loose beneath the wide skies and quivering mountains. Once in control of their little fields and peaceful villages, humans now felt helpless in the face of creatures that could devour what had taken generations to create in a matter of hours. Overnight, livestock disappeared, crops vanished, and homes were broken by hands too strong to stop. Mothers and fathers prayed in silence, their hearts heavy with fear and anxiety, while children hid in shaky corners, their little voices drowned beneath the Nephilim's thunderous footsteps. However, this sorrow was not limited to the earth. With every act of injustice and loss, the cries of the oppressed gradually became louder. Their voices pierced hills and forests, reaching high into the night as women whose families had been split apart whispered. Children wept as they looked for what had been taken, naive and oblivious to the forces that molded their world. The weight of human sorrow seemed to be carried by even the rivers, a soft murmur that echoed along valleys. These voices, unadulterated in their suffering, managed to transcend the limits of the planet. The heavens, which had been silent observers for a long time, started to tremble with grief. Even the stars appeared to flicker with a faint awareness of the suffering below, and angels who had not yet descended paused, their focus drawn to the depth of suffering. The earth itself seemed to have turned into a chorus of mourning, with each note pleading for help, fairness, and equilibrium. There were numerous forms of oppression. After laboring diligently to plant their fields, the villagers woke up to bare ground, their harvests gone in a single night. Families that had been rearing cattle for years discovered that their herds had been drained, trampled underfoot, or stolen by massive hands that were unrestrained. Once playing freely in the meadows, children now hid in fear, their laughter turning to trembling breaths and whispers. Unaware of evil, the Nephilim, obeyed the commands of their massive bodies, but the human world, small and delicate, felt every blow with sorrow. The voices became louder as a result. They evolved into prayers that were beyond human understanding and expressed both desperation and hope. Fathers whispered for strength, mothers for protection, and children for safety. Their voices blended with one another until the air above the land was heavy with grief and desire. The sounds were carried by hills, absorbed by forests, and reflected back in ripples of silent resonance by rivers. It was an unavoidable chorus, a tune of hopelessness and faith that rose steadily toward the invisible worlds. In the hopes that the weight of their suffering would be heard collectively, some people got together in secret to share their stories and grievances. Under the cover of darkness, they lit little fires while pleading for the protection of whatever forces might still be in charge and offering brief prayers. Every voice, whether a cry or a whisper, added to a delicate yet potent tapestry of grief that united families and villages in a shared cry for help. In their vast and ignorant presence, the Nephilim were unable to fully understand the extent of the suffering they inflicted. Unaware that every action, every meal, and every step left traces of sorrow behind, they saw people running away or hiding and took it for play or curiosity. However, something inside the Watchers was also stirred by the cries that made it to heaven. The once desirous angels were now uneasy, feeling that the balance they had upset had far more repercussions than they had anticipated. The profound injustice taking place in the valleys below was sensed by their half-human hearts. These voices seemed to rise, and the sky itself responded. The nights had a strange, silent weight. As though the world were bending closer to listen, the clouds grew thicker, and the winds carried whispers across the plains. According to some, the moonlight softened, and the star flickered in recognition, illuminating the landscapes with a soft reflection and creating shadows that seemed to reflect the pain of the human heart. A silent narrative was being woven into the very fabric of creation, with each tiny voice, tear, and trembling breath contributing to a larger pattern. Nevertheless, there were times of silent hope even amid the sadness. Villagers supported one another by sharing what food was left over, protecting children and providing consolation when words could not. Elders whispered tales of faith and protection to lead hearts through the dark. Fathers held their families close under shaky roofs, and mothers sang lullabies to allay fears. These modest deeds of bravery and love joined the chorus, reaching upward with tenacity and humility, like threads of light entwined with the shadows of despair. The oppressed people's cries were not ignored. The heavens had become conscious of the imbalance, but the world appeared far away and overwhelming. Beings who had once walked with the Watchers and witnessed the results of forbidden unions were aware that the suffering of the innocent had transcended the limits of mortal existence. The prayers were gentle yet forceful, not commands but pleas, a reminder that even the most frail human voice could have immeasurable weight when it was interwoven with grief, hope, and faith. Thus, the cries of the oppressed grew louder and louder as the giants roamed on, devouring fields, flocks, and the tenuous safety of human life. Each note of these voices, which came from shivering children, silent villages, and hidden cottages, was a subliminal plea for justice and the restoration of the natural order. The land itself appeared to remember, with each hill, forest, and stream resonating with the grief and hope of a people whose world had been altered by creatures too big, too strong, and too foreign to completely comprehend the significance of their own existence. There lived a man whose presence seemed to bend the world differently, whose footsteps carried a quiet weight that whispered of eternity amidst the chaos and the towering shadows of the Nephilim. From the beginning of his life, he moved with a calmness that contrasted with the trembling earth and terrified humans around him. His name was Enoch. He was unique, not in size or strength because he was human, but in spirit and heart, a being whose very soul seemed to be tuned to the rhythms of heaven. He was born into a world that already teetered between wonder and destruction. Enoch showed a natural awareness of the world beyond the ordinary even as a young child. He would stop and watch the small movements of the trees, the silent flow of the rivers, and the light in the eyes of both humans and animals, while others ran and yelled in terror of the Nephilim or marveled at their accomplishments. He felt as if he could hear the echoes of creation, a faint but resolute echo that brought him one step closer to comprehending the divine order concealed behind the chaos of both giants and mortals. He moved slowly, attentively, and carefully, as if he were walking alongside a world that was too big and too delicate to hurry, rather than pursuing power or being afraid of the enormous children of heaven and earth. Gradually, his intimacy with the Almighty was revealed. Enoch spoke softly in prayer and contemplation, raising his heart and mind to the heavens, while other people screamed in anguish or cowered in shuddering silence. He appeared unfazed by fear, despite the fact that the Watchers continued to roam the land, and that the Nephilim ate what humans had worked so hard to obtain. His calm manner of working the soil, his soothing voice when reassuring children, and his patience in attending to all of his neighbors' and family's needs were the first things the villagers noted. An intimacy with a force far greater than what the earth or sky could provide was suggested by the steadiness in his hands and the softness in his gaze. Enoch's reputation grew along with him, but not in the sense of prestige or wealth. His kingdom was measured in whispers, prayers, and the silent love he had for creation. He was neither a king of men nor an army commander. People turned to him for wisdom that seemed to emanate from an invisible source, not for help in battle or defense against the giants. It was as if the calm around him touched a part of their consciousness that had not yet been awakened, and even the Nephilim, whose hearts were untrained but their minds vast, seemed to pause in his presence. Enoch spent his days in intimate contact with God. He passed through forests trampled under giant feet, alongside rivers that carried the grief of those down below, and beneath stars that had seen the rise of giants. And he spoke softly everywhere he went, raising thoughts to the sky, silently seeking advice and listening in ways that the average person could not. It was said that the peaceful power emanating from him caused the leaves of trees to tremble, and that even the wind appeared to bend around him. He walked because the world itself seemed to be calling him to observe, comprehend, and be present in the delicate balance between earth and sky, not because he wanted attention or recognition. Enoch's relationship with God was not one of great spectacles or miracles. It was subtly ingrained in day-to-day existence, a silent acknowledgement that every action could have purpose if it were motivated by love and wisdom. Without envy or ambition, he studied the Nephilim and learned about their great power. Wherever he could, he assisted humans by giving advice on how to raise crops, care for animals, and preserve the tenuous peace of villages torn between the turmoil of giants and the hardships of everyday existence. In a world towed by extremes, his cool, collected voice served as a gentle anchor. Enoch's prayers blended with the cries of the oppressed as they ascended to heaven, but they were interspersed with steadfast intercession rather than rage or despair. He prayed for understanding, justice, and mercy that would reach the hearts of both the divine and the mortal, not for dominance or punishment. It was said that the Almighty conversed with him in return, sometimes through visions, quiet impressions, and the soft stirrings of insight, rather than always through spoken words. These taught us to be patient, to be balanced, and to have a profound understanding that the suffering in the world could be contained, even though it was not always completely reversible. People started to notice that Enoch had a presence that changed the energy in a field or a room. Crops produced more fruit under his direction. Illnesses appeared to decrease after his death, and even the animals became more placid under his care. It was the reflection of a life tuned to harmony, a human heart that had learned to move in unison with divine will rather than magic or power in the traditional sense. Despite their strength and hunger, The Nephilim themselves appeared to be aware of this subtle authority, halting their movements when he came near, as if their powerful instincts had been forced to recognize his silent weight. Enoch consequently gained notoriety as the man who walked with God. His life was characterized by a remarkable intimacy with the invisible, a presence that connected heaven and earth in a world already altered by giants and knowledge that was forbidden, rather than by conquest or grandeur. He seemed to be carrying the delicate balance of life on his shoulders, as evidenced by the deliberateness of every action, cautious words, and gentle deed. His life became a quiet thread of hope, a calm current beneath the storm, and a reminder that even in times of turmoil, a connection with the divine could offer guidance, strength, and serenity. This was as human despair and Nephilim hunger threatened to tip the world into chaos. The nights that Enoch spent were not like those of other men. As the villagers slept under the moon's soft light, he would get up and walk lightly through fields and woods, his gaze raised to the sky as though he were looking for a way out of the clouds. The heavens opened up to him in ways that few could ever fathom during those moments. Constellations moved purposefully. Stars glistened like lanterns suspended in endless black, and secret passageways of light and shadow opened up to reveal worlds beyond mortal sight. Every vision was a step closer to a world that was just beyond comprehension, a world where angels moved with silent power and where the laws of heaven were revealed in patterns of shadow and light. The angels that Enoch saw were diverse. Some were glowing and brilliant, while others were dressed in soft shadow. They all moved in a rhythm that mirrored the harmony of the universe. Instead of using everyday language, they communicated with him through impressions and vibrations of thought and emotion, which gave him a deeper understanding than human comprehension. They showed him how the stars cycled, how energies flowed to form creation, and how light and dark interacted delicately to govern both the divine and the mortal. Despite having a human body, Enoch absorbed these visions with a calmness that seemed to enlarge his soul, with each revelation leading him farther into the eternal mysteries. There were visions of light, of worlds where angels walked in radiance, their wings spreading out in patterns that reflected the geometry of the heavens. The quiet music of creation, a gentle, all-pervasive rhythm that permeated every aspect of life, hummed in these places. Enoch observed the angels performing tasks that were invisible to humans, directing the motions of the stars, regulating the course of rivers and winds, and preserving the equilibrium of life in both visible and invisible worlds. As a silent observer of ancient and infinite laws and patterns, he was humbled and amazed by the perfection that defied mortal understanding. Other visions were subtle and enigmatic, shrouded in darkness. Here, Enoch witnessed worlds where darkness and light coexisted, and angels fought to keep the peace in the face of forces that threatened to upset it. These were places of caution and instruction, where decisions were important, and even the slightest action could have a profound effect on the entire universe. He witnessed powerful beings that were both helpful and harsh, acting with purpose and meaning. Even though the scenes were occasionally disturbing, Enoch's heart stayed composed because he felt he was learning to appreciate the full scope of creation, both its beauty and its dangers. Enoch discovered that the names of angels were more than just words as he traveled through these celestial journeys. They were also keys to their meaning and position in the universe. Some served as guides, assisting the spirits of the righteous in finding their way. Others were watchers, keeping an eye on the activities of giants and mortals. He was able to bring glimmers of the divine into the world of men because each encounter left a mark on his soul, a memory that seemed to pulse with quiet energy. These were teachings on discipline, harmony, and the timeless rhythm that underpinned everything, a rhythm he would subsequently convey in his writings and visions. Enoch also caught a glimpse of the vast stretches of space beyond mortal vision during these travels. Comets, planets, and other celestial bodies all moved with silent accuracy, reflecting the will of God. He sensed the flow of time between worlds, the flow of celestial energies, and the thin thread that bound heaven, earth, and the worlds beyond. He was reminded that knowledge and power came with responsibility by some visions that contained warnings of imbalance and shadows cast by creatures whose actions upset the natural order. He knew that the Almighty's plan interwoven light and dark into a single, meaningful tapestry, but even in these times of darkness, he felt protected and guided. The trip wasn't always tranquil. Enoch occasionally had visions that were too intense for his mortal senses to process, full of shapes and sounds. His awareness was filled with mountains of light, oceans of shadow, and creatures beyond description, but he navigated them with a serenity that came from trust. In order to bring the essence of the invisible into the world of men, he learned to breathe in the infinite, let the impressions pass through him fearlessly, and capture what he could in nuanced symbols and stories. Every glimpse of the heavens broadened the horizons of his soul. Every encounter with angels taught him patience and discernment, and every vision deepened his understanding. Enoch learned about the fine line that separates human free will from divine authority as a result of these travels. He observed how interference could have negative effects, how beings acting outside of their place could cause subtle ripples, and how mortals could either harmonize with or disturb creation. In his visions, the Watchers, whose unions had produced giants and upset the balance of the world, appeared as wars. Ning characters, reminders that unbridled desire had dire consequences. However, he also saw the kindness of heaven and how opportunity and direction could bring even the flawed to understanding and healing. When Enoch came back from these travels, he always had a calmness about him that affected everyone around him. The villagers took note of his steady voice, his soft hands, and the serenity in his eyes. Even the Nephilim, who had altered the landscapes and inspired terror, appeared to hesitate at his approach, perceiving a presence that existed in silent accord with greater truth rather than requiring submission or inspiring wonder. Enoch's life served as a living bridge between worlds, demonstrating that it is possible to have a close relationship with God despite the chaos and temptation in the world. Thus, luminous journeys through heavens of light and shadow occupied Enoch's nights. He traversed worlds that mortals could not see, learning, seeing, and hearing, bearing insight and wisdom that could not be fully expressed but could be sensed. Every encounter was a whisper from the Almighty. Every vision was a lesson, and every return to the earth was a silent gift of wisdom, endurance, and direction for a world beset by imbalance, giants, and knowledge. Even as the cries of the oppressed and the hunger of the Nephilim reverberated softly beneath the stars, his heart turned into a mirror of the heavens, reflecting the vastness, the beauty, and the careful balance of all creation. Every valley and hill was pressed by the chaos of the Nephilim, the echoes of forbidden unions, and the weight of past transgressions. However, the effects of what had been let loose were not limited to people. The powerful creatures known as the Watchers, who had come down from the sky with secrets, curiosity, and desire in their hearts, now had to deal with the consequences of their decisions. They approached Enoch shaky and unsure, not with arrogance or disobedience, but with fear and desire, knowing that strength alone would no longer be enough to restore the peace they had broken. Their leader, Semjaza, and the other 200 Watchers came toward him in the shade of mountains, where their footprints were still visible on the ground. Their wings, which had once shone brightly in the heavenly light, now drooped and appeared to be burdened with regret. They used tones that carried echoes of celestial power restrained by humility, rather than using everyday language. In order to soften the effects of their decisions, they pleaded with Enoch to speak to the Almighty on their behalf and to intercede. Nevertheless, there was a tremor and a sense of tension in the air, despite their cries flowing like rivers of sound, because heaven did not answer right away. Enoch listened silently, his serene demeanor a sharp contrast to the Watchers' fear and despair. He had experienced the vastness of divine order, seen worlds of light and shadow, and walked the heavens. He was aware that justice and mercy were delicately woven threads that could not be bent by even his own voice without great purpose. Therefore, he spoke softly, without condemnation or assurance, but with a presence that let the fallen angels let go of their anxiety. They spilled tales of regret, longing, and the times when curiosity and desire triumphed over prudence. Every confession felt like a slight vibration that seemed to touch the boundaries of eternity, a tremor in the air. The watchers recounted their first awe of humanity, the fragility and beauty that had beckoned them across the emptiness. They talked about the secret knowledge shared, the oath taken under Mount Hermon, and the unions that produced the giants. Every memory was laden with regret, and despite their strength, their voices had a tone of entreaty, a hope that the person they were speaking to would act as a mediator, a link between divine justice and their own fallen condition. Enoch took it all in with a calm composure, his heart not trembling or flinching, but in harmony with the silent knowledge that these were decisions that had consequences, and that consequence was not changed lightly. They pleaded for relief from the judgments that were undoubtedly in store for those who had crossed their heavenly boundaries, as well as from the punishments they had long expected. Some talked about the weight of centuries, about seeing the pain they had brought about, and about not being able to get back to the fullness of light. Others whispered about the innocence they had abandoned, the loneliness that resulted from being ripped away from the harmony of heaven, and the envy and desire that had motivated their actions. They continued to look to Enoch in the hopes that the man who walked with God would lessen the Almighty's intense gaze. But as they spoke, a hush fell. The quiet pause that spanned the heavens was not one of disregard, but one of thoughtfulness. As a reminder that the strands of justice and mercy are interwoven in ways that even angels might not fully understand, the watchers perceived it as both heavy and limitless. Some trembled as if the silence itself held judgment, while others bowed their heads and shivered beneath it. Knowing that the lack of a quick reaction was not denial, but rather the silence before insight, Enoch maintained his composure and gave the meant time to settle. The fallen angels realized how alone they were as they lingered. After acting together and making an oath, they were now all faced with the consequences of their actions. Neither their combined might nor their collective strength could override personal accountability or change the equilibrium that heaven upheld. But the act of begging, of expressing their grief to a human go-between, showed a level of humility that they had never before displayed. Theirs was no longer pride, but acknowledgement, no longer disobedience, but a desire for reconciliation that seemed elusive. In his silent presence, Enoch made no promises. He made no promises about punishment or mercy. He only mentioned witness, acknowledgement, and conveying the truth of their regret to places that are inaccessible to humans. And something changed in that act, something subtle but significant. The watchers, accustomed to giving orders and giving instructions, listened now, humbled by the silence and the constant presence of someone who walked with God. A delicate sense of equilibrium returned to the moment as their voices grew softer and their bodies appeared to settle. This was a silent recognition that hope and accountability could coexist, even if hope was still uncertain. They stayed there for what felt like an eternity, with the earth remembering every footprint of people who had left their place, the mountains observing, and the winds whispering. As a witness rather than a judge, Enoch carried their words toward a presence that was far superior to any fallen angel or mortal being. In their humility, the watchers understood the seriousness of this deed. They were no longer just the powerful offspring of heaven. They were now creatures whose past transgressions needed to be made right by patience, understanding, and the constant application of divine law. And so they waited in the silence that spanned realms, not for answers or instant relief. Even though their voices were now quiet, they still carried the echo of their regret, the memory of the desire that had brought them down, and the hope that their cries had been heard even if they were not immediately answered. Enoch continued to be their serene focal point, the human who witnessed the errors of both giants and angels, and the link between the Almighty's silence and the cries of heaven's children. The Watchers learned something they had not expected in that silence, which was laden with responsibility and unsaid mercy, the subtly potent force of humility, confession, and placing one's hope in the capable hands of a mortal who walked in harmony with the divine. Subtle at first, like the soft rustle of leaves before dawn, the weight of the silence that had spanned the heavens finally started to change. Now, more than in any vision he had ever known, Enoch, whose serene presence had carried the confessions of the fallen Watchers, felt a stirring. The whispers, the regrets, the cries of those who had once walked among the stars seemed to have been heard by the very threads of creation, which seemed to have leaned closer. A feeling of inevitability, a silent, unwavering confidence that the harmony between the earth and the heavens would be restored, arose in that silence, not out of fear, but through reasoned judgment. The scrolls were first presented to him in pieces, fragile and glowing, their surfaces glimmering with an unearthly script that held significance beyond human understanding. Every line had a sense of life, a subtle movement that resonated with the eternal rhythm. With their huge bodies tense and their wings folded low, the angels who had fallen before him watched in wonder, as if they were afraid of even a glimpse of what was written. The tone of the scree, PT, was purposeful, exact, and uncompromising rather than harsh or punitive. It discussed responsibility, how deeds were evaluated in light of divine law, and the strands of consequence that ran through both heaven and earth. Enoch realized how big of a task he had been given. Despite his humanity, his soul had been conditioned to see the universe's harmony, to observe fearlessly, and to comprehend without condemnation. He interpreted the scrolls as a record of what must happen in order to preserve harmony, not just as punishment. The Watchers, whose voices had once screamed for help, now stood in silence, taking in the fact that some things, no matter how deeply one felt regret, had consequences that were impossible to reverse. Normally bright with curiosity or conceit, their eyes softened, revealing humility and the first tremors of true understanding. Clarity and calmness, rather than thunder and fire, were used to deliver the verdict. From the oaths taken under Mount Hermon to the disclosure of forbidden knowledge to humanity, every Watcher's actions were recognized and taken into consideration. All of their impulses, longings, and desires were acknowledged, but they had each changed the world in ways that required action. Because he knew both heaven and earth, Enoch was aware that judgment was about more than just punishment. It was also about re-establishing equilibrium and order, and making sure that the future would be in accordance with the meticulous application of divine law. He saw the effects materialize in a way that was both immediate and permanent. The Watchers' freedom would be restricted, their power would be restrained, and their presence on earth would be limited according to the scrolls. They would no longer be allowed to roam freely, disseminating knowledge carelessly, and they would have less of an impact on both creation and humanity. It was justice, exact and unwavering, intended to bring the world into line with the will of the Almighty. It was not vengeance, for vengeance implies cruelty. The weight of this decree was felt by even the most powerful Watchers, who sensed the certainty of boundaries that had long been disregarded and the inevitable need for restraint. Enoch knew that the scrolls were meant to guide, not to frighten, so his heart remained unwavering. The visions showed that although the Watchers would have to deal with the restrictions placed on them, humanity as a whole would still bear the seeds of their knowledge, both harmful and enlightening, and that the world's course would now be determined by the harmony between mortal free will and divine law. Humans would eventually have to learn, adapt, and survive as the Nephilim, their majestic forms now restrained by the subtle weight of divine consequence would eventually disappear. Enoch recognized this calmly. The judgment was a reversal, a rerouting of events rather than a total erasure. He felt the Almighty's eyes on him as he kept watching, not in a condemning manner, but rather as a silent affirmation that the decision was exactly what was required. Both the firmness and the mercy of divine order were reflected in the scroll's shimmering light and shadow. Each word, Enoch realized, was more than just a sentence. It was a lesson, a blueprint of outcomes that would be felt for generations to come, influencing the destiny of humans, angels, and the precarious balance between worlds. The Watchers were reminded that even though they would never be able to fully regain their former glory, they could still be guided toward understanding by acknowledging wrongdoing and accepting limitations. The rhythm of the scene's development was neither harsh nor sudden. The winds seemed to carry the silent echo of justice through valleys and forests. Rivers reflected the scroll's changing light, and mountains shook slightly. Unaware of the complex webs being woven in invisible worlds, humans continued living their lives, but the world quietly changed. The knowledge that had been shared, both the gifts and the dangers, remained, contained within the balance of the divine decree, while the Nephilim, whose hunger and power had once ruled unchecked, started to lose influence. Enoch's job was to spread the word, not just observe. He realized that the judgment would serve as a reminder to all beings, both mortal and immortal, that every action has repercussions in addition to imposing restrictions on the Watchers. The scrolls documented actions with silent authority, not as retribution for brutality, but rather as a framework for comprehension and a means of preventing the past's mistakes from happening again. Even the most terrified of the fallen angels started to realize that moderation was required, and they could sense the deliberate intent that underpinned each line of the glowing text in the silence. Once proud and unbridled, the Watchers acknowledged the decree by bowing their heads and folding their wings. They had acted out of curiosity, defiance, and desire, but now they had to face the reality of equilibrium. Standing between the realms, Enoch exuded the calm of someone who knew the anguish of judgment as well as the comfort of order. He simply bore witness, making sure that the record of heaven's will was preserved, clear and precise in the glowing scrolls that shimmered with the silent authority of eternity. He did not rejoice in their fall or mourn their limitation. Thus, the verdict was sealed with clarity, purpose, and the serene inevitability of law, not with fire or retaliation. Knowing that the Watchers would bear the consequences of their decisions, and that humanity, which was only aware of the shadows cast by these events, would eventually realize the delicate balance between knowledge, desire, and divine order, Enoch brought the knowledge back to earth in a gentle manner. The scrolls, which were softly glowing in his mind, continued to stand as a testament to the timeless idea that justice and mercy coexist in the silent, unwavering rhythm of creation, and that even the powerful are constrained by truth. Only those who were sensitive to the nuances of creation could sense the earth's quiet trembling under the weight of invisible power. With their footsteps once resonating among the stars and their wings creating shadows across the heavens, Semjaza and the other fallen Watchers had once lived in a world of radiance and passion. They now faced a fate as hefty as the mountains themselves, one that would serve as a reminder to everyone who saw it of the repercussions of disobedience, not just punishment. As the casting moment drew nearer, the air itself seemed to get thicker, carrying a silence that pressed down on even the strongest of the fallen. Towering and magnificent in form, the Watchers gazed with a mixture of awe, defiance, and fear upon the abyss that lay ahead. Their leader, Semjaza, had once been as confident as one who walked with angels, his voice resonating authoritatively across the heavens. But even he felt the weight of inevitable fate pressing against his chest here, at the edge of the abyss, a reminder that no amount of power, knowledge, or desire could reverse the decree that had been placed upon them. The weight of their fate caused their once bright and proud wings to droop, folding tightly against their backs as if to protect them from the enormity of the situation. Chains, made of light and shadow entwined rather than metal, came down from worlds beyond human understanding. They glistened with a chilly light, exact and uncompromising, encircling the watchers with silent power. Every link in the chain appeared to be alive, pulsing in time with the laws of heaven and bearing the burden of all the deeds, vows, and desires that had brought them to this moment. Semjaza fought it, his massive body straining, but the chains moved purposefully, not in a mean or furious way, but purposefully, so that equilibrium would be restored. The other watchers were also engulfed, their movements limited, their strength confined, but even in captivity, their awareness was acute. The actual abyss was a place beyond mortal sight, a profound abyss of silent darkness that went on forever. It was a void that represented the results of being cut off from divine order. It was neither fire nor agony. The watchers descended slowly and deliberately, as though the universe itself directed their descent, making sure that no breath was needed and no movement was wasted. The abyss's quietness against them served as a subdued reminder of the gap between disobedience and rebellion, between desire and self-control. Even their enormous forms experienced the humility of limitation here, in this depth, and their pride was subdued by the knowledge of what they had lost. Visions of the world they had shaped appeared before them as they were lowered farther. They were reminded of the repercussions of their forbidden knowledge and unbridled desires by fields trampled by the Nephilim, forests devoured, and rivers disturbed. But in these recollections, they also recognized the innocence that had beckoned to them across the divide, the beauty they had seen in people, and the brief moments of connection that had been both dangerous and joyful. Every memory and every thought echoed in the chains that bound them, a silent reverberation of decision, consequence, and the fine balance that ruled everything. Once commanding, Semjaza's voice now trembled with restraint as he addressed the others, not in defiance, but in contemplation. He recognized the seriousness of what they had done, the extent of their descent, and the need for the chains that now restrained them. As the watchers listened, the tension of rebellion gradually subsided as their own thoughts blended with remorse and empathy. To make sure that the gifts and knowledge they had released could no longer jeopardize the precarious balance between earth and heaven, they felt the tremendous weight of eternity bearing down on them, not to destroy, but to contain. They could feel Enoch's presence even in the depths, a serene thread that bound them to both worlds. His witness served as a silent salve, a reminder that even though they were bound, their existence was still noticed and accepted. The chains only limited their ability to cause more disruption. They did not remove their awareness or comprehension. The watchers' massive bodies adjusted to the captivity, their wings folding tightly, their strength limited, but their minds stayed intact, conscious of the eternity that lay ahead. Time appeared to stretch differently in the abyss. The watchers experienced extended periods of introspection during which they felt the effects of their decisions reverberating incessantly through their memories and thoughts. The burden of leadership fell especially on Semjaza, who felt the reverberations of every oath taken under Mount Hermon and the weight of every choice made out of curiosity and desire. However, a subtle understanding, a realization that even in confinement there was the potential for learning, insight, and awareness that could not have been obtained in freedom, emerged within the confines. There was a soft reverberation to the descent, as if the cosmos itself was breathing in time with the Watcher's descent. H-chain movement reverberated across realms, teaching lessons of patience, limitation, and acknowledging higher order as light and shadow entwined in patterns that mirrored their actions. The abyss was a purposeful place for introspection and containment, where the magnitude of their deeds could be seen without the diversion of unbridled power, rather than a punishment meant to cause suffering. The abyss embraced the watchers as they sank into the chains, keeping them safely but tenderly. Despite their size, their shapes adjusted to the cadence of captivity. Though filled with remorse, Semjaza no longer fought in vain. Once self-assured and inquisitive, the other Watchers now recognized the subtle wisdom that even their great power could not overcome, the quiet authority of divine law and the certainty of consequence. Yes, they were restrained, but they were also watched, recalled, and, in a way, preserved, maintained within the cautious equilibrium of heaven and earth, a living example of the need for self-control. As a result, the Watchers continued to exist, tethered in chains that reflected light and shadow, a precarious equilibrium between reflection and consequence, suspended between realms. The abyss served as a place of confinement and a silent reminder of the importance of making decisions. But it was neither mean nor vindictive. Despite the endless passage of time surrounding them, Enoch's witness persisted as a delicate thread, a human presence sensitive to the passage of eternity, bearing the understanding of what had happened and what needed to happen. The profound lessons of humility, self-control, and the meticulous measurement of everything under the Almighty's watchful eye were imparted to the Watchers in the silence of the abyss. Once trembling beneath the giant's footsteps, the land started to tremble to a new rhythm, one that was caused by their own unbridled hunger rather than conquest. As offspring of the prohibited unions between Watchers and human women, the Nephilim had become enormous in size, unparalleled in power, and ravenous in appetite. Rivers ran red and thick with the memory of their violence, forests were reduced to splintered shadows of their former selves, and fields that once fed entire villages were stripped bare. However, a seed of doom had been sown even at the height of their power, one that would grow patiently and silently until it ate them up from the inside out. The giants were the first to subtly turn against one another. Small arguments over dominance, food, and territory swiftly grew into violent conflicts that rocked the planet. With a force that split mountainside and upended trees, their massive bodies collided, launching dust clouds into the sky. The ground trembled with a ferocity that the villagers had never experienced, and they could feel the echoes of these battles in their bones as they hid in caves and valleys. However, the giants themselves appeared to be unaware of the more profound reality, which was that their violence, driven by hunger and greed, was driving them to ruin. Their strength eventually unraveled with every bite, blow, and act of dominance. In ways that reflected their thirst for power, their hunger was not only physical, but also insatiable. No herd or flock was sufficient to stop the gnawing inside of them, and no feast could satiate them. In rapid succession, rivers of game, mountains of crops, and even the livestock of far-off villages were devoured. With little forethought, the Nephilim occasionally turned against humanity, leaving a wake of terror and despair as their imposing shapes created shadows that ate up light itself. However, the most aggressive consumption behaviors were frequently aimed at one another. Giants who were born from the same forbidden unions as their brothers and cousins launched unrestrained attacks because of instinctive desires that even their intelligence was unable to control. The ground itself appeared to struggle against them, giving way momentarily before crumbling under the weight of their ravenous hunger. The once vibrant and protective forests turned into desolate wastelands that were devoid of even the smallest roots, bark, and leaves. The echoes of their violence were carried downstream by rivers that wound slowly across valleys, choked with blood and debris. Cliffs eroded beneath the constant movement of giant feet, and mountains cracked under the pounding of enormous fists. Even the sky appeared to grow darker at times, with clouds bearing the weight of storms that reflected the chaos of the giants' existence. As if the chaos of their ancestry demanded it, the Nephilim fought not only to survive but also out of an odd, primal desire to rule one another. Some giants fell silently, their bodies crushed or broken in frantic battles and being eaten by their own relatives. Others, worn down by insatiable hunger, just fell under the weight of their size, their massive bodies leaving behind hollow marks on the ground that resembled the scars of a world gone wrong. Nevertheless, some persisted, their anger unrelenting, their hunger unsatisfied, until the universe itself appeared to push back, forcing a silent, unavoidable reckoning. The Nephilim's violence turned into a mirror of the disorder they had inherited, reflecting decisions made by both humans and angels that were now inwardly directed and from which no one could escape. There were traces of their intelligence and guile, even as they destroyed each other. In the past, the Nephilim had developed strategies, constructed buildings, and perfected weapons that were well beyond human capacity. These creations now turned against them in the midst of their collapse. Walls collapsed due to weight and fighting, towers fell, and tools were used for destruction rather than building. The Watchers' very gifts, their expertise in tactics, weapons, and craft, became agents of destruction, serving as a reminder that unbridled power can lead to its own destruction. Enoch watched this from a distance, moving silently along roads unaffected by their destruction and listening to the beat of consequence as it happened. In addition to witnessing the great tragedy of creation turned against itself, he also saw an odd order emerge from the chaos. Despite their size and power, the Nephilim were constrained by the same instincts and imperfections that had made them. Their power over the world began to unravel with every collapse, violent encounter, and moment of unquenchable hunger. Even though the scene was terrifying, it also taught a subliminal lesson. Unbridled power, no matter how powerful or divine its source, has its own weight and will eventually run out of room. In their last moments, some giants, desperate for power, looked to others, trying to form flimsy alliances. They clung to each other, only to be betrayed by fear and hunger. The sky appeared to lament their never-ending struggle. The rivers were teeming with both life and death, and the earth itself moaned under the weight of their bodies. There were fewer of them every day, the nights were quieter, and the sounds of combat gradually subsided, leaving a void that stood in stark contrast to the previous cacophony. Ultimately, the Nephilim's collapse was neither abrupt nor total in a single instant. It was a gradual disintegration, the inevitable result of excess, power, and desire. Rivers recalled the flow of blood and rage, forests remained scarred, and mountains bore their scars. However, remnants of their existence persisted even in the ruins, serving as subliminal reminders that the world they had altered would never completely forget them. In addition to changing the terrain, their violence, hunger, and might also expose the boundaries of unchecked power and the precarious equilibrium between creation and destruction, strength and restraint. And so the Nephilim, who had once loomed over the world, lay diminished, consumed by themselves, leaving behind the memory of what happens when boundaries are disregarded and desires are left unbridled as the last echoes of their conflict faded beneath the silent stars. Despite its wounds, the land started to heal gradually, carrying with it the lessons and scars of the giants' short, turbulent rule. It whispered through rivers and valleys that balance is inevitable, even in the midst of chaos. Long before the first drops fell, the skies grew gloomy, and those who were sensitive to the rhythms of creation were stirred by the silent warning that echoed around the globe. The chaos left by the giants and the weight of centuries of human foolishness were reflected in the slowly gathering clouds that thickened into a tapestry of silver and gray. The earth, battered and scarred by the Nephilim's violence, appeared to tremble in expectation, as though it too realized that a cleansing was required. The animals moved uneasily as they sensed the change. The rivers whispered of the past, and the winds carried the memory of trampled fields and broken forests. Among his family and the animals entrusted to his care, Noah walked in silence, a man whose faith had not been shaken by the shadows of the past. Calloused from years of care and work, his hands moved calmly and purposefully, getting ready for what he knew was coming. A human endeavor completed with care and devotion, every plank, rope, and corner of the ark was positioned with silent attention. Noah remained a calm thread woven through the expectation of a cleansing storm, despite the tense world around him. Before the skies completely opened and unleashed torrents that had been suppressed for decades, The first drops fell like whispers, small and almost hesitant. Rain fell in a rhythm that seemed to resound with both grief and rebirth. After the Nephilim trampled the fields, water's gentle pressure caused them to dissolve, softening the scars and removing the debris of the mayhem. The world slowly turned into a mirror of itself, reflecting the silvery sheen of unrelenting rain and the gray light of clouds as rivers surged and streams blended. There was only the inevitable cleansing, the silent perseverance of nature and divine will combined, and no rage or vindictive rage in the storm. Noah and his family silently, reverently led the animals into the ark as the waters rose. Sensing the protection provided by the ark's walls, lions, deer, birds, and beasts of all kinds moved with an odd understanding. Each bolt and plank was a promise of preservation, a thin thread of life held against the encroaching flood, and the doors were sealed with purposeful care rather than haste. Outside, the world started to slowly disappear under the water, engulfing valleys, villages, and forests until only the tallest mountains were visible through the unrelenting gray. The rain continued for 40 days and 40 nights. With a steady intensity, it swept across the planet, erasing any traces of the giant's power. Plains turned into lakes, valleys filled, and rivers expanded into thundering channels that forged new routes through the terrain. Massive yet strangely calming, the sounds of the flood were a rhythmic symphony of water against earth, of streams combining and flowing. Even the animals in the ark, who sensed the rebirth of the world, sat in silent observation, their movements and breaths mingling with the sound of rain hitting wood. As he stood inside the ark, Noah was struck by the weight of the outside world and the vulnerability of the life that was kept there. The flood was more than just a punishment. It was a reset, a gentle but firm reminder that the earth, like hearts and souls, required room to purify, rejuvenate, and get ready for the future. The memory of the devastation caused by the Nephilim and their unbridled desires was erased by each wave and ripple, leaving a blank canvas that humanity could walk on mindfully and carefully. Even the tallest giants of the Nephilim were swallowed up by the rising waters, their shapes vanishing under the unrelenting tide. With the exception of the steady hum of rain and the flow of water across hills and valleys, the world that had been noisy with their presence became quiet as the echoes of their footsteps diminished. As the rest of creation was submerged, a silent meditation in liquid form, mountains, islands, and peaks appeared here and there. Silent witnesses to the cleansing, wiping out the past and setting the stage for the future. Under the gray canopy of clouds and rain, days blended into nights, each one indistinguishable. But there was a sense of silence in the ark. As the outside world changed, Noah and his family moved in silence, taking care of the animals, getting supplies, and remaining composed. Their days had a rhythm, a calming pattern that reflected the storm's constancy. Within the ark, life persisted with careful attention, a delicate balance of patience and preservation even as mayhem raged outside its walls. The rains began to lessen as the 40 days came to an end, progressively turning into steady streams that reflected the first glimpses of light peeking through the clouds. The first glimmers of new horizons were made possible by the stabilization of the water levels, which were still enormous. Looking out from the ark, Noah saw a world that had been cleaned, scarred, but rejuvenated, its surface glistening in the gentle light that pierced the remaining clouds. And there was comprehension in that silent moment, an awareness that even in the midst of destruction, there was hope, continuity, and the potential for life to be restored. Unrelenting and unavoidable, the flood had served its purpose. The Nephilim had vanished, their mayhem wiped out, their violence and hunger drowned under waves of compassion and grief. After being purified, the earth patiently awaited the resurgence of life, with gentle hills and valleys prepared to support people, animals, and the seeds of development. And as he stood silently amidst the creatures, Noah sensed the soft pulse of rebirth, the heartbeat of the world that had survived, and the serene knowledge that life could persist even in the most intense flood, provided it was directed by care, purpose, and the silent will of the Almighty. Enoch strolled through the darkness, his eyes raised to the sky, where the stars glistened like fragile light whispers, each one containing tales older than humanity's collective memory. In the silence, he sensed the laws that governed the universe, invisible currents that steered the planets, moons, and constellations with a delicate accuracy that appeared natural but was unforgiving. The lights above were more than just ornamentation. They were tools of harmony, rhythm, and order, and their movements reflected the harmony of creation itself. Enoch felt as he watched that these laws of the cosmos were alive, resonating with a faint hum that was more audible than visible, a language of the cosmos that only those who were sensitive to its delicate rhythm could understand. Inconspicuously, the stars moved, creating patterns that alluded to seasons, time, and life cycles. Enoch viewed the sun's rise and fall as a symphony of light that controlled the tides, plant growth, and river flow, rather than just a recurring event. The moon moved in a soft, steady pattern, drawing and letting go of the waters with a grace that mirrored the unwritten laws of equilibrium. Even the tiniest stars, glimmering dimly at the periphery of vision, had significance in their positioning, shedding light on the laws that controlled day and night, light and shadow, and life and death. Enoch came to the realization that the entire sky was a canvas of wisdom, with every point of light reflecting order, waiting to be understood and remembered. As though the cosmos were breathing into his consciousness, visions appeared before him. He witnessed planets circling one another, moons rotating in unison, and celestial bodies rising and falling in accordance with invisible but unbreakable laws. The stars did not move at random, rather they followed a pattern that maintained harmony between the earth and the heavens, a rhythm established by an unfathomable hand. Enoch's awareness was tuned to the delicate flow of energy that supported all life, and he felt as though he was taking part in this great cosmic dance rather than just watching it. This harmony had once been disrupted by the Watchers, those fallen angels whose tales he had chronicled, who disseminated knowledge that warped the laws of nature. However, the universe appeared to regain its subdued power through Enoch's visions. Planets followed paths that hinted at law and inevitability. Stars aligned, and shadows moved. Enoch was awestruck by the elaborate designs, the subtle way light curved around invisible forces, and how each movement was taken into account in a plan that never faltered or failed. In all its size, the universe was a living example of harmony, a rhythm that needed no praise or witnesses, but provided countless lessons to those who were patient enough to watch. He witnessed comets gliding across the sky, each leaving a trail of fire and shadow that eventually faded into silence. Their precise paths conveyed messages of timing and consequence. He was reminded that even brilliance is temporary by the brightly burning meteors that illuminated the shadowy reaches of space. He learned that the cosmic laws were patient, persistent, and careful in their work from the stars, which appeared to be constant but actually changed subtly over ages. When Enoch realized that the motions of heaven were much more than a spectacle, they were the language of order, a record of intention that linked everything in space and time. This realization filled him with both awe and peace. The angels who were responsible for maintaining the stability of the luminaries and the flow of light throughout the universe were also revealed in the visions as the invisible protectors of the celestial spheres. They maneuvered with quiet accuracy, rerouting paths, coordinating energies, and preserving the unseen framework that kept the heavens balanced. Enoch observed how they subtly but essentially controlled the motions of planets, stars, and constellations. He impression that these creatures were not harsh or judgmental, but rather watchful guardians committed to maintaining the harmony of the cosmos and the integrity of creation, a kind of counterpoint to the mayhem that the fallen watchers had once let loose. He saw the complex interrelationships among the celestial bodies, how the rising of one star affected the setting of another, how the moon's phases dictated the tides and the Earth's fertility, and how the changing constellations signaled the arrival of rains, planting cycles, and the passing of seasons. He understood that life on Earth was intricately linked to the cosmic laws, which link the tiniest bird to the vast oceans and the smallest seed to the largest mountain. Every movement was intentional, subtle, and imparted lessons that those who were patient and respectful enough to observe could understand. Enoch saw the great cycles that went well beyond human lifespans in his visions, which included alignments of the past and future in addition to the present. He witnessed the planets and stars resettling into their original positions after many generations, and the slow rotation of galaxies conveying messages of continuity and significance. These movements were made with a cosmic patience that was beyond mortal comprehension. There was no haste, only the steady and gentle unfolding of law. He believed that the luminary's wisdom should be absorbed gradually rather than quickly, much like the dusk light turning to night and bringing with it the secrets of time, light and order into the quiet moments of introspection. Enoch realized throughout it all that these celestial visions were gifts, instruments to direct both angelic and human understanding. They were intended for understanding of the delicate balance that held heaven and earth together, not for dominance or changing the path of creation. Through patient observation, one could learn to walk in harmony with the universe instead of against it. The whispers of order were carried by the sun, moon, stars, and all other celestial bodies. The vast and silent night sky served as a mirror and a teacher, reflecting the quiet majesty of the laws that govern everything, both visible and invisible, as well as life's patterns and the inevitable cycles. As he took in the visions, Enoch's heart grew calmer, the soft rhythm of the universe lulling him with light and shadow. Every star, orbit, and minute change conveyed a message of equilibrium, reminding him of the never-ending dance between chaos and harmony, creation and order. And in that quiet observation, Enoch experienced a deep sense of calm, a calm understanding that despite the chaos of humanity, the fallen watchers, and the Nephilim, the universe continued to beat in time, and that wisdom, direction, and a gentle assurance of continuity were provided by knowledge of the luminaries, which were as timeless and unhurried as the night sky itself. Enoch stood beneath the silent night sky, the stars above him glimmering subtly, their light bearing messages beyond memory. As he looked up, the universe appeared to open up before him, revealing a soft, purposeful, and exact rhythm. He watched as the moon traced its silvery arc, the sun traced its daily course across the sky, and the stars turned in patterns that alluded to the passing of time, the seasons, and the months. Every action was purposeful, a gentle pulsation of order interwoven into the cosmos that directed life on Earth in both obvious and subtle ways. In the stillness of his mind, the angels that guarded the heavens whispered instructions, teaching him the calendar's secret structure and the holy rhythm that controlled the days, months, and seasons. Every day flowed into the next, and every month rose and fell like the earth's own pulse, as Enoch perceived time passing like a gentle tide. He witnessed how the moon's phases dictated planting and harvest cycles, how the sun's path signaled the arrival of new seasons, and how the positions of the stars served as indicators for the passing of the years. He understood that time was a divine pattern, gentle and flowing but exact in its control. He discovered that the calendar of heaven had a logic that combined the terrestrial and the celestial. The subtle changes in light and shadow that occurred throughout the land were used to measure the length of the day in addition to the sun's rise and set. Lunar phases, a silent dance between the sun and moon that maintained the Earth's equilibrium, were used to count the months. With a soft inevitability, the seasons came and went, directing the cycles of human work and relaxation, animal migration, and plant growth. Enoch realized that this rhythm was fundamental, a delicate order that linked life on earth with the vastness of heaven and the smallest creature to the largest mountain. Through his visions, Enoch was able to learn more about the mystery and the intricate connections between earthly life and celestial movements. He witnessed the arrival of spring when the sun passed over specific locations, reawakening the seeds that had been buried in the ground, luring life out of slumber and green out of brown. Then came summer, which brought warmth and plenty, led rivers and streams, and ripened crops steadily and quietly. Then came autumn, when the light grew softer, the leaves turned crimson and de-gold, and the earth was ready to rest. All life paused to gather strength as the cycles slowed and winter arrived, a season of introspection and preservation. The divine hand that governed the sun and moon orchestrated a gentle harmony, with each season serving as a note in a larger symphony. Enoch observed that the moon had a specific rhythm, with its phases exhibiting a subtle order that affected emotions, tides, and even the silent ebb and flow of human activity. The silvered disk conveyed messages of development, completion, and release from new moon to full. The stars also had a role to play. Their positions signaled the start of new months and the emergence of heavenly celebrations that alluded to harmony and sacred time. Enoch absorbed these facts with reverence, realizing that the calendar of heaven was a living guide that reflected the care of God woven into the rhythm of creation rather than a tool for simple measurement. As he watched, he saw that the angels moved with a silent accuracy, their shapes hardly noticeable, modifying the motions of celestial bodies to make every day, month, and season perfectly in accordance with the laws of the universe. They moved with assurance and gentleness, like a gentle hand steering a large wheel without hurrying or faltering. Enoch believed that time itself was a sacred gift, a rhythm that supported life, and that any disruption of this rhythm, whether brought about by fallen beings or human carelessness, would have subtle effects on the rest of creation. The visions included the comprehension of years, their accumulation, and the unavoidable repetition of cycles. Enoch viewed extended periods of time as strands in an enormous tapestry with recurring themes of development, deterioration, and rebirth. The calendar of heaven served as a framework for living in accordance with the divine order, not just a means of marking the passing of time. Humanity could flourish if it were in sync with this rhythm, knowing when to plant, when to rest, and when to consider the changing of seasons. The cycles were slow but steady, a silent instructor directing all life according to the wisdom of the heavens. Enoch also saw how the sun, moon, and stars interacted subtly with regard to natural cycles and religious holidays. The time for harvest or the start of planting was indicated by specific stars. Others denoted periods of relaxation and introspection, soft pauses woven into life's course. He observed that holy days and festivals arose organically from the alignment of celestial bodies, not as capricious directives but rather as calls to harmonize human existence with the harmony of the universe. For those who watched and listened, each observance was a silent resonance with the divine pattern, a gentle echo of order that resonated deeply in their hearts. Enoch experienced a deep sense of peace as he processed these visions, the rhythm of time itself settling deep within his mind. Every moment had meaning, every shift of light and shadow revealed instructions for life on earth, and the days, months, and seasons flowed like a soft river. He realized that sharing this knowledge was a gift, not just for himself, and that it would teach people to respect the natural cycles, walk in harmony with the order of the heavens, and find serenity in the gentle rhythm of time itself. Enoch thought about the calendar of heaven in the stillness of the night, as the stars softly reflected on the waters below. He could feel the soft pulse of creation in each breath, each shadow, and each glimmer of light. As a living example of harmony, balance, and care, the days and months, the seasons, and the rotation of the celestial spheres were all interconnected. And as he took in this divine rhythm, Enoch realized that with patience and attention, humanity could learn to accept the passage of time under the gentle, timeless guidance of the heavens. Enoch's eyes slowly closed as he saw visions that were not actual scenes, but rather a tapestry of symbols in which events and people took on both familiar and unusual shapes. People were transformed into animals in this dreamlike realization, and each animal embodied the qualities of personality, purpose, and fate. The quiet tread of paws, the delicate flutter of wings, and the soft rustle of fur all told tales older than memory, combining triumphant and foolish moments with the nuanced weaving of human history into allegorical patterns that were more powerful than words. He saw kingdoms come and go, not as stone cities, but as herds of cattle, packs of beasts, and flocks of birds moving across the landscape, their interactions exposing the currents of ambition, power, and survival that had shaped humankind for generations. Each animal carried the weight of choice, but they moved with gentle purpose. Lions roamed like monarchs, arrogant and dominant, but sometimes reckless in their power, while foxes slithered in silent cunning, laying out routes that were ingenious but occasionally cruel. Sheep wandered, frequently lost, and susceptible to the influences around them. These animals' movements created a living allegory that was both peaceful and vivid, illustrating the challenges of leadership and the quiet tenacity of the lowly. Through the repetition of events and the subtle emergence of patterns that taught the eye to see connections that might otherwise go unnoticed, Enoch sensed the pulse of history. He saw human struggle captured in tender yet clear images. Cities at war looked like prides of lions fighting in the golden sun, their teeth bared and their claws outstretched, but the distance softened the violence, making it a lesson rather than a horrific sight. As birds circled and exchanged precise and subtle calls, diplomacy and negotiation developed into netwo, arches of understanding that could either lead or lead the herd astray. The shedding of feathers, the shifting fur of creatures, and the silent movement of animals across fields and rivers all signaled the passing of time, with each movement hinting at both significant and insignificant events. The foxes were patient and clever, and Enoch saw betrayal in their plots, which sometimes led to unexpected success and other times to downfall due to their quiet cunning. He was reminded of innocence by the peaceful herd of sheep who trusted through the ebb and flow of change and were frequently oblivious to the threats that were all around them. Although they were feared, predators also provided equilibrium by teaching the animals and humans in the allegory the value of self-control, awareness, and flexibility. Despite being symbolic, the vision was wise and clear, reflecting human decisions on the natural world in a gentle yet profound way. Moral and spiritual lessons were seamlessly woven into the human story in these symbolic narratives. Enoch observed how arrogant animals fell under their own weight, or how wise and patient people handled the difficulties of the land with composure and consideration. Each lesson was infused with subtlety as wars, alliances, betrayals, and reconciliations transpired with the ease of organic movement. He saw the weight of history as a river of cause and effect rather than a burden, carefully guiding those who watched to comprehend the complexities of virtue and consequence. He was transported by the vision to times of quiet tranquility and immense abundance. Birds sang from tree branches, rivers glistened in the sunlight, and herds grazed in lush valleys, all of which symbolized times when people coexisted peacefully with the land and one another. Enoch was reminded by these infrequent, priceless, and fragile moments that history was not just a chronicle of conflict and conquest, but also of wisdom, kindness, and the gentle rhythms of cohabitation. Life persevered even in allegory, imparting lessons in humility, patience, and the silent strength of unwavering goodness. However, there was tension in the vision. Desire and power corrupted some animals, causing them to move in ways that upset the natural balance and echoed the chaos brought about by the Nephilim and the interference of the fallen Watchers. These incidents demonstrated the brittleness of order, the ongoing work needed to keep things in balance, and the nuanced effects of decisions that deviate from the norm. Despite its gentleness and symbolism, the vision was heavy with caution, urging introspection, comprehension, and careful attention to the lessons that are concealed in both action and consequence. In this symbolic world, Enoch sensed the subtle interdependence of all beings. Every creature's journey affected others, illuminating the intricate network of ties that united people, groups, and countries. Predators influenced prey, others' actions led or dispersed flocks, and even the smallest movements had an impact on the story that was being told. Like the allegorical vision, it served as a reminder that human history was never isolated. Every choice, deed, and goal had an impact that extended well beyond the immediate time, influencing events and lives in ways that may not be fully realized for some time. The allegory expanded to include life's cycles and the lessons of endurance, patience, and silent watchfulness as he delved further into the vision. The birth, growth, and eventual fading of animals reflected the rise and fall of generations. While some exhibited wisdom beyond their years and others succumbed to impatience, each had a role to play in the story's development. Enoch realized that these symbolic animals were representations of both individual and collective fate, a gentle narrative map of humanity's historical trajectory that guided understanding of morality, consequences, and the delicate need to learn from both success and failure. The vision's colors changed gradually, with twilight tones mingling with gentle moonlight and the glistening reflection of rivers, bringing calm despite the allegorical conflicts that were taking place. Enoch sensed a soothing presence in the observation, a soft realization that knowledge could arrive without condemnation, and that historical lessons expressed through symbolic animals could be quietly absorbed like a lullaby. The vision carried the rhythm of wisdom in its subtle movements, encouraging contemplation instead of fear, observation instead of meddling, and patience instead of hurry. Enoch felt the story of the world gently unfold around him in the silence of the vision. With a grace that only the symbolic could afford, the allegorical animals who stood in for humanity carried on with their dances of victory, foolishness, and perseverance as they unfolded history. Every action, every conversation, every soft ripple across the landscape had purpose. It taught without demanding, guided without coercion, and demonstrated that even in the vast fabric of life, lessons could be quietly absorbed and carried in the heart rather than imposed. Enoch closed his eyes as he saw visions of the far future, depicted in a soft light that didn't seem harsh or ephemeral. Amidst whirling darkness and soft flashes of light, a figure emerged, simple but radiant, wrapped in a calm and authoritative aura. This was the Son of Man, an enigmatic creature whose arrival was hinted at throughout history, unknown to most but certain to have an impact on everyone's hearts. He promised justice, understanding, and the return of equilibrium, but his arrival was not abrupt or dramatic like thunder or fire. Rather, it was gentle, like a soft dawn breaking across a tired land. With a quiet authority that seemed to emanate from within, the figure moved among crowds without ever completely merging with them. Enoch witnessed people pause in his presence, not in terror, but rather in a quiet realization that their lives were now entwined with something greater than themselves. The Son of Man was neither a typical monarch nor a warrior on a quest for victory. He brought wisdom with him, a serene discernment that touched people's hearts. As though the air itself whispered truths they had long shunned, even those who had wandered, who had made mistakes, or who had deviated from what was right, felt a subtle pull toward introspection. According to Enoch's vision, the Son of Man spoke in a rhythm that was almost melodic, with each sentence carrying a soft force that guided rather than controlled, healed rather than punished. People started to see the fine lines that connected one life to another and the subtle ways that their actions shaped the world. After being split apart by pride, fear, or greed, communities gradually started to listen, think again, breathe, and move in a more gentle, common rhythm. Even the natural world seemed to react. The sun threw a warm, steady glow that mirrored the feeling of calm that was subtly spreading among the O's in attendance. Rivers flowed more gently, and winds shifted as if bearing blessings rather than storms. Enoch saw the Son of Man traveling through towns and cities, always accompanied by small miracles that were more revelation than spectacle. Crops flourished in previously barren areas, cracked soil healed, and the sick experienced a sense of calm that permeated their bones rather than just their minds. There was only an indisputable authority that resulted from perfect alignment with divine purpose, not a display of dominance or power in the traditional sense. This being represented what humanity had forgotten, a vision of life that nourished rather than destroyed, justice that was balanced with mercy, and a balance between strength and compassion. The Son of Man did not follow a hurried route. Every gesture and every moment had meaning, but they were delivered gently, like a child being told a story at dusk. He imparted knowledge through parables, straightforward pictures with profound meaning, and subdued examples that showed the results of decisions without passing judgment. Enoch witnessed subtle changes in people. Disagreements became less heated, resentment subsided, and understanding touched long-standing emotional and physical wounds. The realization that their lives were a part of something much bigger, a delicate web that the Son of Man subtly illuminated, caused even those who had previously been hardened by desire or greed to pause and think. In one vision, Enoch saw the Son of Man standing on a hill, the morning light softly illuminating him, and people from far-off towns coming together in silence, sensing a call that didn't require words. They were drawn by curiosity, longing, and the subtle pull of truth rather than coercion or fear. And they came from all walks of life. Every word he said had multiple levels of meaning, imparting lessons on humility, patience, and the value of paying attention to life's rhythms. While elders nodded slowly, realizing that history, faith, and destiny were intertwined in ways they had not previously fully understood, children sat quietly, engrossed in his presence. Conflictual moments, areas where injustice had taken hold, and areas where darkness threatened to rule, were also depicted in the visions. Even so, the Son of Man took a measured approach, driven more by wisdom than rage. Instead of destroying mindlessly, he restored with care, exposing avenues for peaceful restoration and reconciliation. Instead of only facing violence, those who opposed him were given the opportunity to see the results of their decisions and the potential for change. His power came from insight rather than fear, and even the hardened hearts he came across started to soften under the weightless influence of knowledge. Enoch sensed the subdued magnitude of this figure's mission. The Son of Man bridged the gap between heaven and earth and was more than just a teacher or prophet. He was a sign of cosmic balance, the legacy of divine justice and mercy, the whisper of long-hidden truths, and the gentle call for humanity to walk with awareness were all carried within him. Every action he took and every word he said had a subtle yet profound impact on the lives of people he touched, causing reverberations that went well beyond the present. The Son of Man was never by himself in the vision. Angels were with him in silence, guarding and guiding, but invisible to others, their presence a silent comfort rather than a spectacle. The earth itself appeared to react, with winds changing to clear roads, sunlight illuminating obscure nooks, and waters reflecting clarity where there had been haze. His weight was not imposed, rather, it was a silent invitation to harmonize with the natural cycles of creation and the soft currents of divine purpose. When humanity remembered its higher calling, Enoch realized that this prophecy was a promise, a gentle light of what might be. The Son of Man represented hope, serene justice, and gentle yet uncompromising truth. As Enoch observed, the vision persisted, a silent reminder that even in a world tainted by chaos and mistakes, a force that restored harmony, led hearts, and illuminated paths of understanding could appear, all without the use of force or rage, but with the gentle power of love, wisdom, and divine purpose. Elevated in spirit, Enoch found himself silently hovering before an unimaginable sight, a vision that was both vast and serene in its solemnity. The great throne of judgment, a seat of silent authority that seemed to envelop the entire universe, stood before him. The throne itself carried the weight of certainty, the soft assurance that every action, thought, and intention would find its place in the scale of justice, even though it was neither menacing nor glaring with rage. Its surroundings glistened gently, like sunlight glinting through a calm forest's leaves, and Enoch experienced a deep silence that filled his heart with awe and serenity. The righteous gathered close to the throne in silent accord with the harmony of creation, rather than out of fear or expectation of reward. They moved easily, the light of understanding and the soft rhythm of patience reflected in their spirits. Enoch noticed the faint gleam in their hearts, which each displayed honesty, modesty, and a serene acceptance of life's ups and downs. The air seemed lighter around them, a gentle river of calm energy that carried whispers of confidence and rest. The wicked, on the other hand, were not there as agonizing shadows, but rather as people who were burdened by their decisions, their bodies hunched under the silent weight of consequence, a natural reflection of deeds that remained unpunished. The throne itself appeared to exude a balance of mercy and judgment that was both somber and consoling. Enoch felt that the vision was defined by the balance, the delicate balancing of intent, mistake, and truth across lifetimes, rather than the punishment. As though the universe itself had stopped to reorient itself, bringing harmony where disruption had taken root, the wicked fell not in pain, but with a silent inevitability. And instead of soaring in arrogant victory, the righteous found peace and a gentle acceptance of their position in the flow of creation, resting in the silent knowledge that harmony had been restored. Enoch's gaze swept across the scene, absorbing the judgment's immense scope. Angels silently circled the throne, acting as stewards rather than guards, directing everyone's movements with a subtle, imperceptible, yet profoundly felt touch. They reminded Enoch that justice and order were upheld by silent watchfulness and unwavering consistency rather than by force. Their presence was calming, like a soft wind sweeping across the surface of still waters. Whether burdened or aligned, every soul appeared to react to the throne's rhythm, a subliminal recognition of the universe's inherent flow of truth and consequence. As the vision developed further, it revealed deeper levels of comprehension. Enoch observed that the decisions made by people and nations were creating complex patterns that spanned time, reflecting the past in the present. He saw how even the smallest choices had an impact, how acts of kindness or carelessness had an impact that extended well beyond their original context. The throne did not move quickly. Instead, it waited, taking in the entirety of life, letting events play out before putting each thread in its proper place. A sense of peace and quiet wisdom that alluded to the divine's patience and the necessity of balance was conveyed by this methodical pace. The subtle differences between the wicked and the righteous caught Enoch's attention. The choices they continuously made, the disregard for wisdom, and the preference for self over harmony were what characterized the wicked, not just their deeds. Their fall was a soft settling into the inevitable outcome of imbalance, rather than one that was loud or violent. And instead of being glorified by spectacle, the righteous embraced a calmness that was a gentle mirror of their alignment with truth, compassion, and the natural rhythms of creation. The contrast was stark but subtle, imparting knowledge rather than terror and teaching by observation rather than coercion. Time and space were transcended by the throne's light, which illuminated both far-off places and the innermost recesses of people's hearts. Enoch felt that no deed went unnoticed, but no soul was left behind. The vision was one of total awareness, where every goal and effort was carefully and precisely weighed, rather than one of severe punishment. The scale of judgment was enormous, covering everything that had been, everything that was, and everything that would be. But it functioned with the calm, unhurried steadiness of the night sky. The universe itself appeared to breathe in a silent recognition of its own harmony in this vision of ultimate order, where the echoes of every decision found resonance. Lessons were even carried by the atmosphere, which vibrated gently with comprehension rather than stress. Enoch experienced the weight of accountability as well as the deep serenity that results from seeing perfect balance. Standing before the throne, the righteous mirrored this equilibrium in their stance, their gentle motions, and the silent light that seemed to radiate from them. Additionally, the fallen, who were humbled but still physically intact, were reminded that every disturbance has a reflection of its own, a gentle echo of lessons that should be learned rather than fought. The vision grew, demonstrating how human behavior impacted the larger scheme of things. Enoch saw how intentions and outcomes interacted subtly, with each thread tying people, groups, and countries together. The elements of existence were brought into alignment with a gentle, indisputable logic by the throne's response to the patterns that life had woven. With planets and stars following movements that mirrored the harmony upheld by the great throne, even the heavens themselves appeared to hum with this subdued symmetry. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Enoch felt at ease. The peace, purpose of judgment was not to arouse fear, but to reveal the natural order, to show that deeds have consequences, and to show that peace results from being in accordance with truth and integrity. The vast and patient universe provided guidance and correction, a gentle reminder that harmony is achieved naturally through the development of consequence, awareness, and understanding rather than by coercion. Even in the midst of the solemnity, there was a deep sense of calm, a lullaby of harmony that reverberated softly in Enoch's heart and the silence of the universe. Enoch was drawn slowly forward into a vision of the future world, as though he were being carried by an invisible current. The new earth and the new heaven spread out before him like a gentle, glowing tapestry, illuminating every nook and cranny of the terrain with a soft, inviting light that was neither harsh nor blinding. While rivers flowed with waters that shimmered like liquid crystal, moving silently but purposefully, and sculpting paths that reflected harmony rather than struggle, mountains rose in serene majesty, their peaks kissed by golden rays. As though the atmosphere itself whispered peace into the hearts of everyone who walked on this planet, the air itself seemed to be alive with a gentle hum, a quiet vibration of life and peace. Every creature moved fearlessly and aggressively, carrying the stillness of perfect balance, as forests stretched on forever, the leaves rustling in a faint symphony. Birds sang soft but meaningful songs that reverberated across plains and valleys as they soared through skies tinted in shades of pink, lavender, and gold. Every kind of animal coexisted with mutual respect for one another's position in the overall scheme of things. Enoch observed that even the smallest animals, fish, ants, and butterflies, moved with ease and purpose, taking part in a rhythm that was both silent and profound, a dance of harmony and peace woven into the very fabric of life. The sky above was also changed, becoming a vast expanse of soft radiance with gentle movement and boundless depth, instead of being cold and distant. Like serene lanterns, the stars glowed in the waters below, their light blending with the rising sun and moon, which were now precisely positioned to support life's cycles. In a faint, nearly imperceptible rhythm that echoed the heartbeats of all creatures below, the sky itself appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting. From the tiniest pebble to the tallest tree, every element carried a sense of place, a silent echo of divine design that promoted comfort, happiness, and a deep sense of community. Enoch felt a calmness seethe into his bones as he walked on gentle meadows. Without haste, flowers of innumerable hues and shapes parted their petals, releasing scents that were soft yet evocative, bringing with them memories of beauty, hope, and rebirth. Even the wind felt alive, caressing his skin with gentle awareness as it led him along pathways dotted with shimmering stones and soft grass. Every stride was deliberate but natural, as though the whole terrain was in tune with life itself, a hymn sung by creation to the souls of those who would traverse it. Rivers flowed effortlessly through valleys, their surfaces reflecting the sky above and carrying the songs of life with them. Under the crystal surface, fish swam with grace, and creatures drank fearlessly along the banks, moving in time with the water's flow and the world's soft song. Enoch was astounded by the lack of conflict, the smooth operation of everything, and the feeling that each instant was filled with purpose and ease. Even the shadows cast by trees were gentle, flowing with the light, as though darkness and light had learned to live together harmoniously, neither too strong nor too weak. The inhabitants of this new creation seemed to be glowing beings, with radiant yet organic forms that conveyed an inner harmony in each look, word, and gesture. Without conflict, fear, or jealousy, they moved, talked, and engaged with each other in silent understanding. Enoch saw eyes that gleamed with serene insight and smiles that were serene, reflecting the peace that pervaded both the earth and the heavens. Under the guidance of empathy, understanding, and a common understanding of their interconnectedness with all life, families, communities, and friends coexisted in peaceful harmony. Every being appeared to understand instinctively how to coexist, respect, and care for the environment around them, so there was no need for force or command. According to Enoch, cities arose in balance with the natural world, their architecture flowing with the land's natural contours and composed of materials that shimmered subtly in the moonlight and sunlight. In the center of every city were waterways that carried food and a calm energy that fed every soul in their path. Every courtyard was filled with blooming gardens, each one whispering of eternal renewal as its colors changed subtly over time, reflecting the rhythm of the seasons without ever hurrying or fading too quickly. Their lives unfolded like a slow, soft melody that echoed with the hum of creation itself, as the people moved with ease through these areas, linked to the land, the sky, and each other. Without any sense of urgency or control, angels floated silently above, their wings gently arcing in the light of the new sun, directing the movement of clouds, the flow of air, and the equilibrium of everything. Instead of ruling, they brought harmony, and their presence served as a gentle reminder that the world's perfection was preserved by careful, silent alignment with God's will rather than by coercion. Their gentle motions conveyed energy without making noise, bringing warmth, clarity, and the soothing cadence of ageless care to the lives of the creatures below. This new creation was more than just a work of beauty. It was a living example of what happens when patience, harmony, and awareness come together, and Enoch felt a strong pull of understanding in his heart. The atmosphere exuded a deep sense of peace and tranquility that beckoned introspection, thankfulness, and silent delight. Every sound, movement, and flash of light was a part of a vast, gentle rhythm, a lullaby of life that welcomed it without fear or force. In this gentle yet comprehensive vision of eternity, peace existed naturally as a reflection of the harmony between all things, rather than having to be earned via hardship. Enoch lingered in the vision, strolling gently along the banks of glistening rivers, beneath trees whose leaves rustled in the light wind, and among creatures whose serene brilliance appeared to reflect the very center of the heavens. The new creation was vast yet personal, alive yet silent. It promised a world where the echoes of suffering, hunger, and terror had been replaced by peace, plenty, and wisdom. It promised rest, harmony, and eternal light. And in the middle of this serene beauty, Enoch experienced a subtle sense of certainty that this vision was not just a dream, but a map of possibilities, a gentle call for people to align themselves with the rhythms of divine light and peace, bringing the promise of eternity into every instant. Once, Enoch's words, meticulously written and transmitted through the ages, were a source of quiet prominence, whispered in the recesses of hallowed places and read by those seeking enlightenment by candlelight. However, it was the slow, nearly imperceptible hand of omission that gradually caused the Book of Enoch to disappear, not because of violence or theft. The book's pages became less cited and referenced as kingdoms came and went, as customs and priorities changed until it remained on the periphery of memory, a secret treasure concealed beneath layers of more well-known texts. Those who had previously respected its teachings were now hesitant, unsure of how its revelations would fit into the changing fabric of practice and faith. Though its wisdom, angel visions, cosmic order prophecies, and warnings of hidden powers was potent, it unnerved those who valued simplicity over mystery. Careful and cautious, scholars and scribes discussed its position, pointing out that it was present in some collections but absent from others, and eventually it was decided to set it aside. Although it was not completely lost or destroyed, its use in public education declined, making it more susceptible to disregard. The book silently passed from hand to hand over centuries, sometimes cherished, sometimes disregarded, always bearing the burden of invisible realities that the world was not yet prepared to accept completely. There were layers of meaning in Enoch's writings that called for perseverance, introspection, and discernment. It was impossible to read the stories of the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the cosmic laws in a superficial way. They required focus and a mildly open mind. This depth was unnerving to some, and the text's subtle complexities were difficult for a society that looked for simple solutions. Texts that were simpler to incorporate into doctrine and that could be repeated in sermons and rituals without running the risk of causing misunderstanding or discomfort gradually came to be preferred by traditions. During this silent transition, the Book of Enoch progressively disappeared from the canonical collections, its existence being recalled more in rumors than in public. The brittleness of manuscripts themselves also played a role in the disappearance. Because they were meticulously hand-copied, scrolls and codices were susceptible to deterioration, fire, and human error. A treasure slipping farther out of sight, the book became more vulnerable with each generation that did not save a copy. Even if a copy did survive in a far-off village or monastery, it was frequently disregarded, hidden away among other holy texts, and its importance was undervalued. Nevertheless, the Book of Enoch endured during these silent periods, a faint but persistent echo of the visions it contained, waiting for those who would seek it out with caution and respect. Changes in politics and culture also had a minor impact. Some texts were quietly set aside, while others were carefully designated as empires grew and religious leaders sought to unite. With its tales of angels transcending boundaries and people gaining knowledge that was forbidden to them, Enoch's writings contained concepts that went against accepted interpretations and hierarchies. It served as a reminder to readers of both hidden and celestial powers, as well as of consequences that went beyond earthly authority. The text was gradually taken out of public education, its voice preserved only in secret scrolls and hidden libraries because some leaders believed it to be a dangerous companion that could upset unquestioned order. The book's impact persisted even after it was lost. Later texts make reference to the Watchers and Nephilim, whose echoes are faint but distinct, like far-off stars that can be seen through clouds. When scholars came across pieces of the writings, they were astounded by the depth of understanding and realized that the Book of Enoch had subtly influenced readers' beliefs, ideas, and imaginations. Its teachings persisted in quietly reverberating throughout communities, directing introspection and investigation for those who were prepared to pursue its unspoken realities, even as it faded from the public eye. It was truly miraculous that the book survived in some areas. When other manuscripts crumbled to dust, copies written in Ge'ez and preserved in Ethiopia survived. Unaware of its rarity, monks and scribes meticulously preserved and copied it, making sure that the wisdom it contained did not completely disappear. Even as centuries went by and other versions vanished, it was preserved by its language, culture, and meticulous notation. Through these silent preservations, Enoch's voice remained available to those who would eventually rediscover it, serving as a link between historical visions and contemporary curiosity, ready to enlighten receptive minds. The intricacy of Enoch's visions may have played a role in the book's eventual demise. Its layers of cosmic insight, allegory, and prophecy demanded that the reader be prepared to stop, think, and interact with nuanced realities. The Book of Enoch required patience, gentle study, and an uncommon openness in an era that frequently valued certainty over introspection. This requirement caused it to remain a marginal text for centuries, cherished by a select few, disregarded by the majority, and silently preserved where it could endure. Therefore, the Book of Enoch's disappearance was gradual rather than abrupt or violent, a gentle fading into obscurity, akin to twilight over an ancient landscape. In its absence, there was quiet instead of clamor, and the world was left with echoes, shadows, and fragments of its lessons. However, the essence of its words remained, serving as a subliminal reminder that once knowledge is imparted, it is rarely completely lost. It still encourages exploration, introspection, and a gentle awakening to the mysteries of heaven and earth, despite being concealed and even disregarded. The Book of Enoch imparts patience and perseverance through this silent disappearance. Even though it was taken out of the canon, its spirit persisted, demonstrating that truth, when properly guarded, can endure the shifting tides of time. In ways that are both enigmatic and incredibly consoling, Enoch's words continue to reverberate through time, waiting for those who approach them with respectful silence, quiet curiosity, and an open mind. They provide glimpses of cosmic order, celestial wisdom, and the unfolding narrative of humanity's journey. Long after the majority of the world had forgotten about the Book of Enoch, it found refuge in Ethiopia's highlands, where it was safely preserved for centuries by the subdued rhythms of tradition and faith. Monks who dedicated their lives to patience, introspection, and the gentle preservation of sacred knowledge meticulously scribed the pages of fragile scrolls and codices that were housed in monasteries situated in valleys and on cliffs. Far from the political hubs that had disregarded or ignored Enoch's writings, the book was revered here, and its words were carefully read, committed to memory, and meticulously copied. The Ethiopian Church acknowledged it as scripture, a holy window into the secrets of heaven, the order of the cosmos, and the direction of angels, rather than just history or allegory. The monks realized that the Book of Enoch was not like any other text they owned. The Nephilim, whose presence altered the world, angels who transcended the boundaries of heaven and earth, and cosmic laws that controlled stars, seasons, and time itself were all mentioned. Prophecy, parable, and symbolism were all interwoven with lessons in its vivid yet nuanced visions. It was advised that those who approached it read slowly, breathe in time with the text, and let its meaning develop subtly in their hearts and minds. In the remote place, the book evolved from words on a page to a living manual, a prayer and contemplation partner, and a silent force that shaped the faith of those who dedicated their lives to its study. Writing each letter as though it were the weight of eternity, Ethiopian scribes worked with reverence, using brushes softened by care and inks made from natural pigments. Scrolls were carefully rolled and kept in wooden cases that shielded them from the changing seasons and the effects of time. Each copy served as evidence of the tenacity of devotion and the recognition that the information contained in these pages was both delicate and vital, intended to endure even after the outside world had turned its back. The Book of Enoch, a treasure trove of knowledge that linked the far past to the present, containing visions of the heavens, whispers of the watchers, and the timeless footsteps of Enoch himself, remained alive in their hands. Due to the Ethiopian Church's acknowledgement of the book as sacred scripture, Its stories were shared among those seeking peace, wisdom, and a sense of divine purpose, and it was read aloud in quiet gatherings. Because the words were recited with a gentle cadence rather than in haste or for show, listeners were able to fully comprehend the gentle lessons and imagery contained within each passage. The Watchers, the Nephilim, and Enoch's visions were not myths to be rejected. Rather, they were truths that reverberated subtly, influencing children's worldview, sense of duty, and awareness of the invisible worlds that coexisted with the everyday. Ethiopia's highlands continued to be a resolute haven, even as centuries went by and other areas completely lost the book. When travelers and scholars discovered the manuscripts, they were frequently taken aback to discover such old and intricate writings so completely preserved, unaffected by the neglect that had silenced the text elsewhere. In order to ensure that every generation could experience the profound insights free from distraction and haste, the monks continued their slow work of copying and studying, and the monasteries became silent custodians of a cosmic memory, their libraries softly glowing in candlelight. Once concealed, the sacred text now had a place where it could be protected by the silent discipline of devotion. Awe was still evoked by the Book of Enoch's content. The Nephilim who roamed the earth, the angels who had once descended, and the visions of celestial order now appeared to be both historical and timeless, connecting heaven and earth in ways that spoke to people of all ages. Ethiopian academics realized that the book provided more than just historical information. It also provided insight into ethics, accountability, and the interaction between people and the invisible forces that molded the universe. The book was kept alive for a reason. It was recognized that the words it contained could lead the soul to introspection, humility, and a silent comprehension of the immense complexity of creation. The book's longevity was aided even by the actual preservation sites. The manuscripts were protected from the chaos and upheavals that swept through other regions by monasteries tucked away in isolated valleys that were only reachable by steep trails and meandering paths. The highlands and mountains served as kind protectors, reiterating the text's holiness. In this instance, the monks moved silently among the scrolls, their gentle footsteps crees, aiding a rhythm of respect, each step strengthening the bond between the earthly hands responsible for caring for Enoch's divine message. Careful instruction was another aspect of the Ethiopian Church's devotion, making sure that every reader comprehended the text's symbolic and literal levels. Through the vivid visions that Enoch had documented, students were led to recognize the connections between spiritual laws, human behavior, and celestial movements. Since the information was patiently provided rather than imposed, each seeker was free to find the rhythm of understanding at their own speed. Because of this, the book was not only preserved but also kept alive, its influence subtly woven into Ethiopia's spiritual fabric, preserving knowledge that might have otherwise been lost. The Book of Enoch became a unique link between ancient revelation and modern curiosity after centuries of careful guardianship. Its survival was evidence of the enduring strength of devotion, the endurance of human hands led by faith, and the understanding that some truths, even if they are obscured or disregarded by the outside world, need to be fostered in private, sacred settings. The center of this preservation was the Ethiopian Church, a living sanctuary where the teachings of the book continued to permeate, fostering comprehension, providing opportunities for introspection, and preserving Enoch's quiet yet powerful voice for future generations. Like far-off stars visible on a clear night, the Book of Enoch's echoes murmured faintly through other sacred texts, even as it was preserved in Ethiopia's peaceful monasteries. Between lines detailing the angels' descent and the Nephilim's ascent, there are subliminal references to the Watchers and their interactions with humanity in the first few chapters of Genesis. The weight of old tales that have endured through the ages, waiting for a patient eye to notice, is carried by these fleeting glimpses, which resemble shadows that flicker in candlelight. The essence remains despite the lack of names and specifics. creatures transcending boundaries, people impacted by extraterrestrial knowledge, and the results of decisions that are beyond the realm of common understanding. Jude's letter, which speaks of angels who left their rightful home and the judgment that followed, also subtly conveys Enoch's presence. Although the words are brief, they reverberate the greater stories found in the Book of Enoch for those who are sensitive to historical rhythms. Through these fleeting references, one can almost hear the gentle rhythm of Enoch's voice, a whisper of tales long preserved, reminding readers of the delicate balance between freedom and restraint as well as cosmic order. Even though they are few, these allusions are like ripples on the surface of a deep, motionless lake, suggesting the vastness beneath that which few have seen but everyone may sense. Although it has been changed into the symbolic language of prophecy and allegory, the shadow of Enoch's visions can still be seen in Revelation. The weight of observation, judgment, and cosmic structure that Enoch documented is also present in the emergence and collapse of kingdoms, the appearance of strange creatures, and the resolution of heavenly mysteries. For those who are willing to look with patience and quiet understanding, the imagery resonates with the clarity of ancient insight despite being dense, layered with meaning, and frequently challenging to interpret at a glance. The continuity of vision is apparent to the attentive reader, as though Enoch's visions of the heavens and the coming judgment are still faintly resonating throughout the text. These reflections serve as gentle reminders of a common viewpoint rather than being overt repetitions. Scattered throughout these texts, concealed in language that both reveals and conceals, are the Nephilim, the Watchers, the visions of cosmic law, and the final reckoning. Even without access to the entire Book of Enoch, readers for centuries were able to grasp the scope and depth of the narrative by recognizing these connections. The early, middle, and last glimpses of humanity's encounters with the divine, the forbidden, and the eternal seem to be connected by a thin thread that runs through Genesis, Jude, and Revelation like a silver line. The subtle appearance of Enoch in the Bible encourages contemplation rather than fear. The fleeting references to giants and divine creatures roaming among people in Genesis evoke awe and apprehension while emphasizing the importance of setting limits and the consequences of decisions. The brief reference to the rebellion of the angels in Jude emphasizes the repercussions of going beyond predetermined bounds and serves as a reminder to readers that freedom comes with responsibility. The cosmic scale that Enoch observed is echoed in Revelation's symbolic language of visions and judgments, which connects human history to the rhythms of eternity in a subdued yet captivating pattern. These shadows work together to create a meaningful tapestry that is invisible to the quick-sighted but resonates with those who take the time to stop, think, and breathe. Enoch's direct account was once excluded from many canonical collections, which may be explained by the subtlety of these allusions. Even though its existence was not entirely disclosed, its stories continued to have an impact and shaped knowledge in both overt and covert ways. When scholars and believers realized the connections, they felt a generational continuity, a hidden thread that connected the heavenly story of guidance, rebellion, consequence, and redemption with the human experience. Even though the Book of Enoch was no longer included in some collections, its influence persisted for centuries, subtly influencing thought and perception. Enoch's influence can be seen in even the smallest details. Sons of God and daughters of men are mentioned briefly in Genesis, hinting at the interplay between realms and the complexity that results in human affairs. Jude emphasizes the limitations of divine power and the punishment of those who transgressed prohibited limits. Despite its apocalyptic imagery, Revelation communicates the timeless concepts of equilibrium, order, and ultimate restoration, all of which are essential to Enoch's cosmic vision. These pieces come together to create a delicate map that quietly encourages exploration with patience and care for those who wish to comprehend the hidden layers of human and celestial interaction. These reflections' subtle integration is what makes them so lovely. They are gentle, like moonlight gently spilling across a landscape, revealing shapes without being harsh or demanding. They are neither loud nor obtrusive. If one looks closely, one can see a pattern, a resonance of ideas, and a sense that Enoch's ancient visions have been transformed and are now part of the greater narrative of creation, humanity, and the divine. These shadows serve as a reminder that a text's lessons can endure even when it is hidden, fostering understanding, guiding introspection, and providing hints of truths too big to fit in a single scroll or codex. Enoch's understated demeanor also encourages humility. The tales of giants, angels, and cosmic judgment inspire the reader to take their time, pay close attention, and think in private. They provide a feeling of depth and continuity, demonstrating how human experience is a part of a broader framework that reaches into the subtle currents of eternity and beyond the immediate and visible. Echoes of Enoch are found in Genesis, Jude, and Revelation. They are gentle reminders that wisdom frequently lurks in the background, in the form of clues, shadows, and fragments, waiting for those who approach it patiently, openly, and with composure. Even for those who may never read the entire text, Enoch's story continues to have an impact thanks to these reflections. Scripture's use of shadows is an invitation for readers to stop, pay attention, and see the hidden facets of both human accountability and divine order. The Book of Enoch, despite being lost to many, is still alive in spirit, echoing across time, bridging the visible and invisible, and providing a silent, enduring connection to the mysteries of heaven and the unfolding story of creation. These gentle signposts point toward a deeper understanding. The echoes of Enoch are not limited to the Judeo-Christian tradition's scrolls and texts. His presence can also be traced in the silent verses of the Quran, where he is mentioned by the name Idris, far beyond the mountains and valleys where his writings were preserved. The man who walked closely with the divine, who was given knowledge of the heavens and the secrets of creation, and whose life was characterized by wisdom, devotion, and extraordinary insight, is still the same person despite the name change. Idris is mentioned only once, almost in passing, but foe are those who pay close attention to the soft rhythm of the words. The hints that link him to Enoch are obvious. Idris is characterized as a prophet with profound insight, a personified and divinely guided individual whose patience and devotion distinguish him from common mortals. He was taught by angels, given knowledge and understanding beyond human comprehension, and given lessons intended to lead humanity in subtle, enduring ways. This is similar to the story of Enoch, who walked with God and saw visions of the unfolding patterns of creation itself, angels, both faithful and fallen, and cosmic order. These reflections show us a bridge that connects the echoes of ancient truth from one language and people to another, spanning centuries, cultures, and sacred traditions. When comparing the lives of Enoch and Idris, the similarities are remarkable. Both characters received extraordinary knowledge and transcended the realm of everyday human existence in one way or another. The portrayal of Idris as a man elevated by divine favor is reminiscent of Enoch's flight through the heavens, escorted by angels and revealing the vast architecture of the cosmos. Both impart lessons on the responsibility that comes with knowledge, including the obligation to comprehend, the necessity of acting justly, and the need for caution when one has insight into powers beyond human comprehension. These teachings emerge subtly, like moonlight on still water, in the gentle rhythm of the Quran, shedding light on the depths of a man's life without overpowering the reader. Similar to Enoch's story, Idris's highlights the importance of being near the divine and the spiritual advancement that results from following a wise path. Although neither the fallen angels nor the Nephilim are discussed in detail in the Quran, the concepts of ascension, heavenly knowledge, and moral guidance are always present. The invisible is seen, worlds beyond the immediate are acknowledged, and it is implied that certain truths are given to selected people to protect, nurture, and pass on. These themes are universal across traditions, as evidenced by the resonance of Enoch's experience in Idris's story. It is as if the gentle light of wisdom endures and passes unbroken from one age to the next. The lessons in both traditions go beyond what is readily apparent. Like Enoch, Idris exemplifies the notion that knowing the secret laws of creation is a moral and spiritual obligation rather than just a matter of curiosity. Humanity is oriented toward order, patience, and respect for divine structure by the knowledge he gains about stars, time, and angelic guidance. These themes reaffirm the teachings of Enoch, reminding us that humility, concern, and an awareness of the consequences of one's actions must be balanced with the pursuit of knowledge. Idris thus turns into a living embodiment of Enoch's journey, a gentle echo in a different holy voice. Idris's story is preserved in the Quran, which further demonstrates the ongoing respect for people who unite heaven and earth. In places where the Book of Enoch might have been obscured or forgotten, Idris is still visible, and anyone who reads and considers his teachings can benefit from them. However, the similarities are subtle and call for consideration and attention. Idris's presence must be understood in its subtle, quiet way, just as Enoch's visions must be approached gradually to allow their complexity to develop without hurry. Both encourage the reader to stay, take a deep breath, and reflect on both the written word and the more profound truths that are hidden within. Enoch's echoes in Idris are not just about ascension or knowledge. They are also about how people engage with the invisible. As go-betweens, both characters impart knowledge from the divine to the human world, teach about the obligations that come with that knowledge, and illustrate the fine line that separates understanding from obedience. Idris serves as a reminder that true wisdom develops gradually, gently, and under the watchful eye of a steady, silent hand. He exhibits the same serene, measured reverence that Enoch does. When one thinks about Idris's humility, the spiritual resonance only grows. His elevation results in measured, patient service, rather than haughtiness or a detachment from humanity. This illustrates the gentle wisdom of Enoch, who was profoundly sensitive to the needs and experiences of humanity despite traveling through the heavens and among angels. The verses of the Quran maintain this echo, a silent link between customs, providing a profound and consoling sense of continuity. The tale of Idris remained gentle over the ages, inspiring readers to consider the nature of knowledge, the invisible order of creation, and the ways in which divine wisdom can impact human existence. The similarities with Enoch are apparent to those who stop and listen, not as exact replicas, but as gentle, resonant patterns, akin to distant waves skimming the surface of a placid sea. Understanding, clarity, and a connection to the eternal are the rewards for those who approach the mysteries of heaven and earth with patience and reverence, and those who are given insight are entrusted with responsibility. This lesson is timeless. Enoch's story is subtly preserved in the Quran through these echoes, demonstrating how wisdom, truth, and divine direction can cut across linguistic, cultural, and temporal barriers. Idris's gentle portrayal of his life encourages readers too. Think about the universality of a few ideas, walking with God, pursuing knowledge, and striking a careful balance between the material and the spiritual worlds. These echoes, which span centuries and sacred texts, serve as a reminder that some stories, even when obscured or reframed, persist with a quiet, reassuring tenacity, gently lighting the way for those who are willing to notice. Long after Enoch's tale had faded from many collections, the quiet caves of Qumran held a secret that would reverberate for centuries amid the dry cliffs and secret valleys of the Judean desert. The fragile treasures found in these caverns, which were shielded from the wind, sand, and the bustle of passing civilizations, were manuscripts, scrolls, and fragments written on papyrus and parchment that had been meticulously preserved by people who led simple, contemplative lives. When they were eventually discovered by modern eyes in the middle of the 20th century, it seemed almost miraculous, as though time itself had bent to make sure that some long-forgotten truths would endure for a new generation to witness. There were pieces of the scrolls with faint, recognizable signs of the Book of Enoch. Even these brittle relics whispered the same old stories, despite the markings being frequently incomplete, charred in places, and crumbled at the edges. Visions of celestial realms, angels who had come to earth, and Nephilim looming over human settlements continued to cling to the worn surfaces, patiently awaiting careful scholars to understand their meaning. Enoch's hidden voices resurfaced in the silent stillness of the desert caverns, bearing the weight of centuries in the form of faint traces of ink and fiber rather than loud declarations. The Qumran Scrolls' discovery was a gentle awakening of history itself, not just an archaeological event. After carefully removing centuries' worth of dust and sand from the fragments, researchers discovered text that contained echoes of stories that had been preserved for a long time in Ethiopia but had been all but forgotten elsewhere. Some of the fragments were incomplete, providing hints of forbidden knowledge, angelic hierarchies, and the moral complexity of the intertwining of heaven and earth. Even though they were unfinished, these fragments spoke to the greater story, implying that Enoch's tale had never really disappeared, but had instead been patiently waiting for quiet hands and watchful eyes to hear its whispers again. The discovery's almost sacred quality was enhanced by the caves themselves. Tucked away from the sun's heat and the shifting sands, narrow passageways led to secret chambers where scrolls had been meticulously preserved in clay jars. The ancient keepers preserved knowledge in the cool shadows, out of the reach of those who might ignore it, as if they understood its fragility. Both the deserts and the Ethiopian monks' seclusion served as gentle repositories of knowledge, allowing the echoes of the past to endure the ravages of time and softly resurface for those who could hear them. Even the academics who initially came across the fragments handled them carefully because they understood how delicate the materials were and how delicately the words they contained resonated. As the ancient language and symbols gradually unveiled patterns of angelic descent, the rise of the Nephilim, and visions of the heavens and their divine order, each piece demanded patience and respect. As they handled these pieces, it seemed as if they could sense the gentle presence of Enoch himself, a silent mentor who bridged the gap between the ancient and modern LDS and invited introspection, comprehension, and wonder without using force or urgency. Additionally, the Qumran fragments provided a nuanced understanding of how Enoch's story had been passed down through the ages. Wording, structure, and emphasis variations revealed that these texts were dynamic and lived, traveling through communities, being copied, preserved, and sometimes slightly modified. The distinctions suggested that knowledge is resilient, flexible, and brittle. However, the main themes, the existence of watchers, the influence of the Nephilim on humanity, divine judgment, and the close relationship between the faithful and the invisible worlds remained distinct despite differences. Even though these themes were partially hidden, they carried the same light weight as the full Ethiopian texts, serving as a reminder that even the smallest pieces could shed light on the way to comprehension. These scrolls' rediscovery created a subdued fascination that grew over time among academics, theologians, and anyone interested in the secrets of old writings. The rhythm and cadence of stories that had endured through the ages were revealed as the fragments were carefully examined, one sentence at a time. Soft but indisputable, like a far-off wind bearing incense aromas, Enoch's echoes in Qumran led those who approached respectfully toward the complex interaction of heaven and earth, human and divine, visible and invisible. Spirituality and history converged in the shadows of these caves. The act of physically unfolding the scrolls took on a meditative quality, a gentle communion with a past that had been hidden for a long time but was never completely absent. Even the smallest or most incomplete piece provided information about angelic hierarchies, cosmic order, and the moral decisions that shaped human supernatural interactions. As each scroll was unveiled, the silence tale of Enoch seemed to reverberate into the world, as if the caves themselves were holding the breath of centuries and releasing it gently. The discovery at Qumran confirmed the universality of Enoch's story, despite the fact that only fragments have survived. The story of angels, Nephilim, and heavenly visions cut across space and time, weaving a tenuous web of sacred memory between the ancient Near East, Ethiopian highlands, and the Judean desert. In addition to interpreting the text, scholars who worked with these fragments frequently felt a subtle resonance, a serene sense of continuity that cut across generations, reminding them that some truths endure in silence, waiting for patient hearts to notice them. The Book of Enoch's influence subtly made a comeback to the world through this rediscovery. The Qumran fragments linked these threads to a larger historical and spiritual context, even though the Ethiopian church had preserved the entire text and the Quran contained the parallel story of Idris. As if the ancient voices of men and angels, giants and prophets had waited for the perfect opportunity to speak softly once more, the story breathed again thanks to the careful hands of scholars, the fragile ink on parchment, and the quiet desert. The old story of Enoch was no longer completely obscured by the scrolls of Qumran, but it still had its soft, enveloping aura. Instead of rushing, the fragments urged readers to approach them with patience and focus, allowing the silent lessons to develop. Each fragile fragment served as a link between the past and the present, between the human and the divine, a reminder that even shadows kept in clay jars can convey important lessons that endure over time, providing a serene, timeless echo of the man who walked with God and the celestial mysteries he saw. Even after thousands of years, Enoch's words seem to float silently through the ages, sending a gentle but unfailing warning to any generation that stops to hear it. His message was never intended to overwhelm with dramatic spectacle or to shock in a flash. Rather, it develops gradually, like the gradual illumination of dawn over a quiet valley, leading people to consider their decisions, their journeys, and the fine line that separates mercy from repercussion. Through visions and revelations, Enoch attempted to illustrate the price of disregarding the moral and spiritual frameworks that sustain the universe. He saw a corrupted world where human ambition and greed distorted the natural order. In Enoch's tale, corruption serves as a mirror for everyone who comes after, not just a repository of past wrongdoings. The violent descendants of humans and angels, known as the Nephilim, were more than just fantastical creatures. They represented the extremes of unbridled power, unbridled desire, and the fallout from disobeying divine limits. Enoch illustrates the silent reality that deeds have an impact well beyond their immediate moment through their ascent and descent. The urge to take without giving, to harm without thinking, to break the brittle bonds that bind morality, community, and respect for the invisible order are all subtle but persistent temptations that humanity must contend with. These patterns are calmly and clearly revealed in Enoch's visions, which call for introspection, mindfulness, and inner watchfulness rather than fear. However, Enoch's message is also filled with mercy. In addition to this caution, there is also a recurring undercurrent of hope and divine patience amid all the stories of giants and angels, of judgment and fall. The Almighty keeps watch, not only to punish, but also to lead, correct, and provide an opportunity for realignment. The mediator Enoch acts as a kind voice, reminding people that compassion and divine justice coexist. Even in the midst of long, deep shadows of corruption, the gentle, bright path of mercy is always there, just waiting for those who are willing to see it, to stop and turn toward it. The core of Enoch's timeless lesson is this duality of mercy and warning, which is expressed not harshly, but rather in a calm, gentle rhythm that endures for centuries. The universality of Enoch's teachings contributes to their timeless appeal. The concepts behind watchers, Nephilim, and heavenly visions are timeless, even though their specifics are tied to a specific period in sacred history. Human hearts wander, societies rise and fall, and decisions reverberate in recurring patterns. Therefore, Enoch's cautions are not limited to a bygone era. Rather, they speak subtly but firmly to our own. Today, we must maintain the same harmony between discernment, self-control, and respect for the things that are beyond our direct line of sight. The narrative promotes a thoughtful approach to knowledge and power, a careful consideration of ethics, and a gentle reflection on the consequences. For the contemporary mind, Enoch's conceptions of divine justice are especially significant. The final judgment, the Nephilim's demise, the purifying flood, and the eventual return of order are all depicted as reflections of cosmic balance rather than as dramatic stories. Every decision and action has an impact on levels that are beyond human comprehension. Enoch's record serves as a remen. Dare that justice is measured, deliberate, and intricately linked to moral responsibility rather than being random. The universe's peaceful, unchanging order endures, providing comfort to those who live moral lives and a sobering reminder to those who deviate too much from the straight and narrow. Enoch's teachings can still be gently implemented in day-to-day living. One can detect echoes of the old warnings by paying attention to our environment, our interactions with others, and the trends in human behavior. Greed, pride, violence, and neglect are not just historical phenomena. They are real and present in every family, society, and person. But we are reminded that change, humility, and alignment with a higher moral order are always possible, just as Enoch saw both transgression and repentance. The narrative turns into a gentle reflection aid, encouraging listeners to stop, take a deep breath, and thoughtfully weigh the effects of their decisions. Enoch's message endures because it is nuanced. It is an invitation to mindfulness rather than a call to panic. Every action, no matter how minor, has consequences, as demonstrated by the Watcher's descent, the Nephilim's hunger, and the divine decrees. Enoch's story encourages people to look beyond their immediate wants and toward the greater harmony of life by emphasizing reflection and foresight. The concepts of mercy, judgment, vigilance, and accountability are portrayed as gentle currents in the river of life that guide without overwhelming, reveal without coerce, and encourage thoughtful evaluation of one's chosen course. Perhaps most importantly, Enoch serves as a reminder to humanity of the perpetual potential for rebirth. A universe that is still just and orderly despite being put to the test by human and angelic errors is suggested by the cycles of corruption and purification, collapse and restoration, the fall of the powerful and the preservation of the faithful. This knowledge offers a sense of tranquil comfort. Wisdom and divine care remain silent even in the midst of chaos. Enoch's tale provides a calming contemplation of the results of human behavior, a gentle reminder that mercy is accessible to everyone, and a reassuring reminder that, despite justice's inevitability, there is hope for redemption for those who are prepared to listen. Enoch's message is thus timeless, subtly poignant, and alive. It is a whisper that transcends time, promoting self-reflection, moral behavior, and a respectful understanding of both visible and invisible forces. Though the lessons are subtle and the warnings are mild, the impact is significant. The goal of the story is to foster a profound, serene understanding of the harmony between cosmic order and human freedom, not to terrify or overwhelm. It guides readers and listeners to align with the values that uphold life, morality, and harmony in the universe by teaching them patience, humility, and attentiveness. Like the soft rustle of leaves in a night wind or the silent glow of stars over a sleeping city, Enoch's message endures despite the world's changes, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the wandering of human hearts. It offers a way of understanding and respect that cuts across time, language, and tradition, and encourages introspection, patience, and humility. The ancient warning is audible to those who pay close attention, not as a command yelled over centuries, but as a calm, timeless manual to live mindfully, to respect the harmony of life, to seek mercy, and to honor the silent, unavoidable presence of divine justice,